Welcome to the Bothell City Council meeting of, where are we, October 18th, 2016. We're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, but we're going to be led by Boy Scout Troop 555, which are all in the front here. We have Tyson Emmons, Josh Hogue, AJ Larson, Mac Thompson, Carter Erb, Riley Elvidge, David Kende, and Asa Jimenez. Is that pretty good? Okay. All right, so you guys go ahead and lead us off on the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise and... Go ahead. You guys start. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great. Thank you, Troop 555. All council members are here except Councilmember Sandberg, who's absent and excused. We have two special presentations to start us off. First is the Puget Sound Regional Council Transportation 2040. Thank you. Welcome. I'm sorry, I don't have your name handy here. Could you?
Gary Simonson.
All right. Nice to meet you, Gary.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you. All right. So, to give you a quick warning that I'm kind of at the end of a cold here. So, if I start coughing, I'm going to turn to the water, and I appreciate your patience. Hopefully, that won't happen. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because it's a bit of a longer presentation than 15 minutes, but I want to make sure, I know you guys have a busy agenda. So I'm going to give my email address at the end, and feel free to, if anyone wants to follow up after the meeting, I'm happy to talk about anything in more detail. So basically we've got our long-range transportation plan update coming up in 2018. And as a part of that, we did a number of background reports to try and sort of gather information on various things that are happening across the region that we're going to incorporate into our update. And so one of the background reports we did was on travel trends. How are people sort of getting around the region? What are some interesting factoids and things that we could find? Today I'm going to go through the presentation for that. The first portion of the presentation is going to be how has travel behavior changed? And then we're going to look a little more closely at how we're growing and how is that affecting our travel patterns as a region. And I've included some bits here, obviously, about Bothell that you'd probably be particularly interested in. So how has travel behavior changed? Well, first, just looking at daily trips by household size, it actually hasn't changed much between 1988 and 2014, remained about the same number of daily trips by household size. An average one-person household makes a little more than 4.5 trips per day. An average 5-person household makes about 19 trips per day. But it's worth noting that 5 single-person households generate 23 trips per day compared to 19 trips per day for one 5-person household. So basically, the smaller the households, the more trips. And that's why we're, I'm pointing out here that the number of people per household in our region is declining, and we are seeing an increasing number of trips, and that's projected to continue. But worth noting that just because we're seeing more trips, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are driving more. Total miles driven per day has been flat since 2006, even though our region's added about 300,000 residents. And so, per day per person, we've decreased by about 1.5 miles in the last 9 years. So people are taking more trips, but they're shorter trips is basically what that is telling us. Fewer young people are getting their driver's license. 2006 licenses for 16 to 17-year-olds was 55%, and that dropped to 45% in 2015. For people under age 35, it was slightly lower. And then for people over 65, actually a notable increase. So basically the driving pool is getting a little bit older, and we're seeing, driver's licenses are a bit less of a priority for younger people than maybe they were, just about a decade ago. So and I apologize, we had to combine Gen Xers and Boomers here just to try and make this a neat slide, even though I know those are two very different demographics. But comparing millennials to Gen Xers and Boomers, millennials drove alone about 43% of the time, while Gen Xers and Boomers drove alone about 59% of the time. And you can see significantly higher percentage of millennials that are walking, 32% versus 20% for Gen X and Boomers. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see if this trend continues as the millennials age. Maybe when they get older, we'll see sort of them kind of fall into the same patterns that we see the Gen Xers and Boomers in now. But that's definitely something we want to keep an eye on. A smaller percentage of people drive alone to work now. In 2006, it was 74%. Now it's 69%. We see transits increased from 7% to 9%. And that is it's only 2% percentage points, but when you're talking about the whole region, it's actually a pretty significant number. You can also see that the walk and bike number increased by about 3%. And just worth noting that driving alone differs by place. It's really the places in King County where we've seen the reduction. You see Seattle, Bellevue, Redmond, we've seen significant reductions, but in Pierce and Snohomish, the two largest job centers respectively, Everett and Tacoma, we haven't really seen much of a change. They're both hovering at around 80%. Transit ridership is increasing significantly. We've gone up from 142 million annual boardings to 185 between 2006 and 2015. That's outpaced both population and employment growth. So we're growing in terms of population and employment, but transit ridership is going even faster. Ferry boardings have increased slightly, but it's actually worth noting that between about 2006 and 2012, ferry ridership actually decreased or was flat, decreased slightly. In the last few years, it's been steadily increasing. Now we're seeing that it's come back to above 2006 levels. Transit ridership growth in our region is actually the fastest in the nation. We've grown faster than any other large metro area in the country in terms of transit ridership growth over the past 10 years. We were the 8th highest in the country in 2015. And then looking at transit commute mode share. So obviously transit makes the most sense in dense places and really concentrated job centers where capacity is more constrained. And so not surprisingly, a place like downtown Seattle, we have a very high transit commute mode share, 54%. Downtown Bellevue, fairly dense, fairly concentrated job center where capacity is somewhat constrained, 25%. But even a more suburban job center like Redmond, Overlake still gets about 19% transit commute mode share. And you know, this is actually not including the Microsoft connector. So it's a pretty decent number. Unfortunately, we don't have enough of a sample size for Bothell to actually get a number, but on that one, but there's some other pieces here that we have for Bothell. So we're the Vanpool capital of the world. We debated if we should say Vanpool capital of the universe or world, but we went with world. Basically, our region moves more people via Vanpool than anywhere else in the country. Our Vanpool ridership per person is 3 times higher than LA, which is the 2nd highest. So we're really sort of head and shoulders above other regions in the country in terms of Vanpool ridership. But it's worth noting that despite all these changes, freeway delay is still growing, right? Delay in regional freeways increased 95% between 2010 and 2015. HOV lanes accounted for over 4% of the delay, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in 2010, you could basically cruise through on the HOV lanes, even during peak periods, during rush hour, without having to worry about getting caught. Now, that's not the case anymore. And in terms of a couple highways that you might be interested in, 405 has doubled in hours of delay between 2010 and 2016. And 522, unfortunately, we don't have the data for that, but we'll say that I think in 2014, the average travel time between Seattle and Woodinville was about 60 minutes. So, okay, so how are we growing and how has it affected our travel patterns? So right now in 2015, we were at 3.9. I believe we've already crossed over the 4 million. I said here we expected in early 2017, but we've gone even faster. We're on track to be almost 5 million people by 2040, which is sort of aligns with what we had said in our vision forecast. Employment, we just exceeded 2 million jobs. We've added over 260,000 jobs since 2010. Job growth is robust and grew at an annual rate of almost 3% in 2015. So now I'm going to look quickly at something called Jobs Housing Fit. And basically what this is the number of jobs over the number of housing units. And what it tells you is for a certain jurisdiction, is it more of a jobs-rich community or is it more of a housing-rich community? So do more people work there, or are there more housing units for people to live there? So you can see at the county level, King County has a lot more jobs and housing units, while the other three counties, Snohomish, Pierce, and Kitsap, have more housing units than jobs. And that's historically, King County is sort of overproduced on jobs and underproduced on housing. And for the other counties, it's been sort of the opposite. Also, you can see that the number has increased for all the counties except for Kitsap. Kitsap's a little different. They have a more of an aging population. It's just a different sort of dynamic than the other three counties. So looking now at the jurisdiction level, and I want to be really clear here that this is not meant to be a score. A higher doesn't necessarily mean better. It's really just sort of an indicator of what type of community you have. If it's a higher number, it's a place where a lot of people are coming in for work. If it's a lower number, it's a place where more people are going somewhere else for work. So in terms of King County, and we've actually split up Bothell so that it's we have the King County portion here and the Snohomish County portion in the Snohomish County section. But basically the darker color means that it's jobs rich. The lighter color means that it's housing rich. So you can see the east side of Lake Washington is actually a really jobs rich place. There's a high amount of jobs along the east side. Places like Bellevue, Redmond, Kirkland, Woodinville, Algona are all very high. Bothell and Kirkland are both above 1. Tukwila, not surprisingly, is really high. That's an example of a place where there's a ton of jobs and not that many people live there, right? You've got the mall there, you've got the airport supporting services. They only have about 19,000 people. So Seattle actually, interestingly, is muted, even though it's worth noting Seattle does have the highest number of jobs in absolute by far. It's just that they also have so many housing units that when you do the ratio, it ends up being between 1 and 2. Shoreline, which is where I live, is an example of a place that's very housing rich, right? There's a lot more housing units than there are jobs in Shoreline. Same with Southwest King County. And unincorporated is always low. That's worth noting. So here's Snohomish County, and here you can see Everett is the city that has the highest jobs housing fit ratio, which is again not surprising. They've got Boeing there. Bothell's right there with Everett, and this was actually interesting to us. We were surprised by Woodinville and Bothell, but we realized, what my colleague who actually lives in Kenmore realized that there's actually a lot of light industrial in Woodinville. There's a lot of office parks in Bothell, so things that you may not necessarily think of as being major job centers, when you look at it compared to the housing units, you see a significant difference. Especially going back here, you see Kenmore is 0.42. So your neighbor Kenmore is much, much lower in terms of their jobs housing fit. Okay, so now what this is looking at here is, so that sort of gives a sense of the lay of the land. What we're looking at here is we looked at the 4 major job centers in each county, and we want to see where are workers coming from to get to these places, right? And I did add some Bothell data at the end there as well. So for each of these, we've got 2006, 10, and 14, and just for the sake of time, I'm just going to skip to the 14 here for each of them. And so you can see here, what happened in Seattle is in 2014, the percentage in King County dropped slightly from 72% to 69%. So 69% of Seattle workers live in King County. The number from outside the region actually jumped up from 7 to 11%, and that's something we've seen consistently. And it's really because our region has bounced back from the recession more quickly than the adjacent counties. So proportionally, we're seeing more people come into our region for work than we did in the past. Southwest Snohomish County and Everett both saw significant increases in terms of the absolute number. And when we looked at our congestion findings, the commute from Snohomish County into Seattle has gotten significantly worse, and that's a big part of the reason why you just have a lot more people traveling from that area. And then you also see Southwest King County has a fairly high number, and that was one of the areas I pointed out, the Federal Way, Burien, that's fairly housing rich. So those are places where people typically go elsewhere for work. Even wanted to point out here that even Tacoma, it's a fairly low percentage, 2%, but 10,000 people are making that trek. And I should note that not all those workers are necessarily traveling every day. Some of them may work remotely or may travel only part-time, but most of them do. So then looking at Bellevue, so again, I'll just skip here to the 2014 for time's sake. So King County, again, a slight decrease in the percentage of Bellevue workers from King County to about 69%. about 32% of Bellevue workers come from the east side. About 17% come from Seattle. And so going back to '06, that's actually a slight decrease in those coming from the east side, an increase in Seattle. Again, a significant number from outside the region, 10%. 17% coming from South King County. And again, the southwest Snohomish County and Everett, we've seen a significant increase in the number of workers, and we know that second stretch of 405 has gotten worse over the last few years as well. Also worth noting that about 5% of Bellevue workers are coming from Pierce County. So Everett, just go through this really quick here. 2014, outside the region jumped up from 8 to 11%, 19% or from coming from King County of Everett workers, so mostly from the east side in Seattle. And also you see places like Marysville and Lake Stevens, which had a really low jobs housing fit. Those kind of pop on the map there because they're relatively cheap places to live, and they're close to Everett, where a major job center is. So I apologize for the different map here. There's the person who has sort of the black box for turning this data into the maps you're seeing before unexpectedly left, so I just pulled it directly from the, and I'll talk a little bit more about where this data came from, but the LEHD source, it's still the same idea, same type of table here, and then the darker color is where the higher concentration is. So in terms of where Bothell workers lived, we can kind of go through here. 2006, 50% lived in King County, about 42% in Snohomish. Oops, wrong way. And then that number sort of shifted, and by 2014, we've got 45% lived in King County and 42% in Snohomish County. Again, outside the region jumped up from 5% to 8%. Southwest Snohomish draws the most of all the subregions, so people coming into Bothell to work, it's surprisingly, Southwest Snohomish County actually is higher than the east side. And just to clarify, Bothell has been included as one of the east side cities. And then there's significant numbers actually of people coming into Bothell for work from the city of Seattle and the city of Everett. And we also thought you might be interested in just seeing where do Bothell residents work. And so this is kind of interesting because you can see it's a much less evenly distributed sort of a map there, because really you've got, people who live in Bothell either work, most of them work on the east side or in the city of Seattle. You can see in the city of Seattle, on the east side, there's actually multiple job centers there. There's, downtown Bellevue, Redmond, Bothell, various kind of areas that people are spreading around. In downtown Seattle, it really is the sort of downtown, in Seattle, it really is just the downtown area and the inner neighborhoods there that, is a huge sort of attractor for jobs. And you should note that 74% of Bothell residents work in King County and about 20% work in Snohomish County. So really quickly, I had mentioned more workers coming in from neighboring counties. In 2006, we had about 74,000 workers that came from neighboring counties to work on our region. It was about 4% of our region's workforce. But as we go to 2014, over 101,000 workers came from neighboring counties to work in our region. That's 5.3% of our region's workforce. But even more interesting than that, I think when you look at the percentage of the adjacent county's workforce that is coming into our region, it's 26%, right? So that means more than a quarter of workers in these adjacent counties are coming into our region for work. A couple of the places that are notable are, you got Island County, nearly half of their workers are coming into our region. Mason, over 40%. The two biggest counties in terms of the absolute are Skagit, where a lot of folks are coming in to work at Boeing, and Thurston, where a lot of people come in to work at JBLM. So finally, before we close, I just wanted to kind of quickly note that there's a lot of sort of emerging technologies that, a lot of exciting new technologies that are really going to impact everything I've talked about today. So that's not to say the patterns aren't important to look at, but this kind of stuff can really shake things up. New shared mobility options, better traveler information, advancing technology and connected autonomous vehicles. That really has, the impact to change how people travel. We're really sort of still trying to grapple with questions of how these technologies will impact how much people drive, mode share. Is it going to complement transit, or is it going to replace transit trips? So we're still working on that. This is still pretty early in this kind of, in the big picture of these technologies sort of emerging, but we know these technologies are transformative, they're rapidly evolving, and they're going to have a significant impact on travel trends and people's travel behavior. So I know that was fairly quickly there. I wanted to make sure to get through all that in my time, but are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Simonson. Is there questions, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you so much for coming. I got to see you speak at ETP, and I'm glad to see that you were able to make it to Bothell. I had one question. It looked like your data was 2014. So my question is, it looks like the drive alone might be impacted by tolling, and I wondered if the tolling played into those numbers.
Yeah, we haven't collected the data yet for you're talking about the 405?
Right.
Yeah, we haven't yet seen the 20, so it was only the end of 2015. So for our next update, we're going to be looking at that more closely. I mean, I think we have seen some patterns already where certain sections, I believe and I'm not the one who looked into this, so I could follow up with you later to give you more specific, but I think the southern portion of 405 has seen a significant decrease, but the northern portion maybe has seen an increase in congestion.
Right, and I was thinking just in terms of HOV,
Right.
because now you pay tolls, so you don't necessarily ride share.
Right, right. Yeah, so you're saying how have the HOV lanes changed in terms of and that's something
because it's gone up to 3 and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's something we're excited to check on the new data, and that's definitely going to be in our next update, as we'll incorporate a full year of that tolling. So,
Well, I would be really interested to know what those
absolutely.
numbers are.
We're interested as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you for your presentation. So I also wanted to find out, is there historical data that might show us how our area was affected with the 520 tolling?
In terms of congestion?
Yeah.
So 520, so that data showed that, not surprisingly actually, because of the tolling, the congestion actually stayed about flat for 520, decreased slightly even. Congestion for I-90 increased dramatically, right? Because more people were trying to avoid the tolls. So that's sort of, I don't have the actual numbers here, but when you look at the congestion comparison between 2010 and 2015, that's generally what you see.
So that would be on 520, but is there a way to, like our arterial streets here locally?
We did look at some arterials, and we kind of did more of a broad brush sort of, we're seeing that travel times are increasing on arterials, but I'd have to look into specifically some of the important sort of, tangential arterials and we haven't done that yet. So I can look into that and we can follow up.
That is possible then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think so. I mean, we see how robust the data is, but I can take a look.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from council? No? All right. Thank you, Mr. Simonson. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next person is Sabrina Combs with the King County Solid Waste. By Troop 555.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am actually not doing the presentation this evening. We have King County Solid Waste Division Director Pat McLaughlin, who is here to provide that presentation to you. And this is a follow-up with some information from the presentation I gave last week. So he's giving an overview of an overall update for the King County Solid Waste, from the King County Solid Waste Division, about their programs and services and what's going on from their perspective. So Pat?
Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you, Mayor and council members, for inviting me here this evening. It's a pleasure to be here and share with you some of the activities that we've been working on and some of the plans we have going into the future. With respect to your time this evening, I plan to share with you briefly an update on our rates, spend a little bit of time talking about our long-range planning activities and how that relates to something we refer to as demand management, as we're looking into our future, how to serve particularly the northeast part of the county as its population continues to grow. And then finally, its relationship to ensuring the lifespan of our local landfill, which is in Maple Valley, the Cedar Hills Regional Landfill providing a very low cost and environmentally responsible disposal option for the region. So those are the things I'll cover. I'll try and keep my comments to, say, under 10 minutes or so that we can have ample time for any questions or dialogue that you'd like to have. To begin with, want to share with you that in January, we'll introduce a new rate for solid waste coming across our scales. And this rate is going to ensure that we both can have continued reliability in the services that we're providing, but also enhancing some of those services with respect to the facilities that serve the public and the recycling programs that are offered throughout the region. A few numbers that are worth noting. It's been 4 years since our last increase. We did introduce an increase for the first time back in 2013. It had been a number of years prior to that since the tipping fees had changed. That was intended to be a 2-year rate. However, through various operational efficiencies and good financial planning, we're able to stretch that for 4 years. That saved our ratepayers about $22 million as a result of that. But inflationary pressures and the need to continue ensuring the reliability of our system has called for a new rate, which will equate to about a 77-cent per month, or about a 5% increase to the typical single-family user in the city of Bothell. Now, as we look at how that rate money is going to be used and long into the future, we really look and rely upon what we refer to as our comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan provides the framework and the policy direction for big decisions that face our region. And it identifies funding sources and identifies what the cost impacts are for those various policies. The image on your screen there is actually a picture of the 2001 comprehensive plan. And as it turns out, that is the last time a comprehensive plan was adopted in King County. And it looks old, and it is old. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're facing right now, is that we have some important decisions to make for our solid waste system in King County, and we're not benefiting from the updated policy framework that really needs to guide some of those decisions. Now, some of that work did begin to update the policy framework. A 2013 draft comprehensive plan was part of the work program of our advisory committees and our city partners. And so we did a lot to rebuild and update some of that policy framework. But one of the things that was a hard discovery, I suppose, in that process is the dilemma of facing large, long-term, far-reaching decisions about our infrastructure and our services, and having the pressure to make some decisions, but then not having the policy framework to best guide those decisions. And that was an issue that the SCA, the Sound Cities Association, and our advisory committees tackled back in 2013, and actually asked for us to, before we proceeded on the framework within the comp plan that called for instance, the renovation of our transfer facilities. At that time, we had not yet broke ground for Factoria, nor for South County or the Northeast County stations. And so before we proceeded, we were tasked with pausing and reflecting on what made the most sense, because a lot of the core planning assumptions had changed since the 2001 comp plan or the 2007 transfer plan were adopted. In fact, today, as we look at it, we look back and compare what the conditions were back when that transfer plan was adopted. Our tonnage is down about a third. We had expected back then to have about 1.6 million tons going through our system, and today it's closer to 900,000 tons, right? We have system partners that are planning to exit the system in 2028. And that was not something that was really being considered back in 2007. And we also just have a new economy. You know, our operating environment is simply different. And so it made sense to study our options before proceeding, excuse me, with those 3 stations. And that led us to a transfer plan review in March of 2014. And through that review, it was determined that proceeding with the Factoria transfer station was a sensible plan, as well as the South County station. And so those projects have continued forward. However, we were left with the conclusion that we should pursue alternatives to a Northeast station, not to abandon a Northeast station, but to consider, are there viable alternatives? And so that led to a secondary transfer plan review that we were directed to undertake in 2015. And through that transfer plan review, we had concluded that there appear to be viable alternatives, but a lot of the feedback we got through our advisory committees and our city partners was that what we were able to model and analyze didn't benefit from real-world testing. And so the conclusion from that secondary review was to take these demand management strategies and subject them to real-world testing, because what we're trying to decide will have far-reaching implications, particularly to the northeast part of the county, but to the system as a whole. And so in order to make a well fact-based and a decision that has good, sound reasoning behind it, the demand management pilot has been planned for the 2018 period. And so we are in the process now of developing a pilot program. We've got some decisions to make in terms of scoping of that program. What will the role of the Houghton transfer station be? The fee structure. The demand management pilot really focuses on using both extended hours at Factoria, as well as a pricing incentive for customers to use those hours. That's the primary method of trying to displace what would otherwise be a congested station usage, right? So we're trying to test whether or not we can manage a growing population in the Northeast through the existing stations as an alternative to building another station. Meanwhile, we have retained the Northeast station as part of the plan until we can benefit from this real-world testing that would take place in 2018. So between now and the end of or the middle part of 2017, we're finalizing our project scope. We've got to have discussion with our host city partners relative to the permitting implications of the pilot. Ultimately, the decisions around the scoping, particularly relative to rates, to hours, or to any station closures, falls within the authority of the county council. So we would hope that their deliberations would be complete by the middle of the year so that we can proceed with hiring and programming of systems and be ready for the beginning of 2018. All of this, again, is looking with a long-term lens to both serve both on the transfer side, the customers that are coming through our stations, or the haulers who are bringing that collected waste in, but also ensuring that we've got the infrastructure necessary to support the local disposal of that there at Cedar Hills. And we do have planning options that can extend the life of Cedar Hills through 2040. That is in the best, I think, financial interest of the county, as all of our other disposal options appear to be significantly more expensive. But when we look at capacity at the landfill, one of the most obvious things we have to look at is what's going into the landfill, and 70% of what is transported up to the landfill every day could actually be recycled, and instead is being buried. So our continued efforts in partnership with our haulers and our city partners with our prevention programs and our recycling programs is essential. And I think through collective action, we can do even better than we have. We've got a regional recycling rate of 54%, which is really admirable across the county, across the nation. But you can see by these stats of 70% of the waste that could be recycled, I think we could do much better. And so we'll be looking to work with city partners and the county in its own incorporated areas to go after food waste and every other week garbage collection, which are really two basic keys that can help generate higher recycling rates. So with that, I'd be happy to answer questions that you may have, be it on the rate, on our long-range planning, or specifically demand management, or any of these prevention programs.
Councilmember Agnew.
So I'm under the impression that the Houghton site is going to be closed, and if so, when, and what will you do for the citizens in the northeast corner?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our adopted comp plan provides the direction for that very question. And our adopted comp plan says that the Houghton station will close when replacement capacity is available. And so really what the demand management pilot is seeking to address is what is the best means for obtaining that replacement capacity? Is it building a new Northeast station? That is been the traditional plan, and that may indeed be the best solution. However, the studies that we've conducted have indicated there are alternatives that are less costly, and we want to explore those. So the demand management pilot will ultimately answer the question as to how to best serve the northeast part of the county, whether it's through a modified service offering in the remaining stations or to build a new northeast station. But until that decision is made, the timing and fate, if you will, of Houghton will remain unanswered.
Councilmember Spivey.
Great, thank you. So in your study, when you do this, will you be shutting down the Houghton station?
So again, that's ultimately going to be decided by our council, but what I will say is the basis of the two transfer plan studies that we've conducted and the modeling that we did had assumed that Houghton would be closed. So I think that that's certainly one of the scoping decisions, and I think part of that is will it close, for what period, for what services is it closed, and we also need to be mindful of any implications it has to the permit upon reopening and the sort. But all of the studies were based on that assumption.
So, and would the study include all the King County sites as well as some of the South Snohomish County sites as far as to see if there's any uptick in service?
Yes, we need to, and Sabrina was good to point that concern out to us in a recent conversation, that our plan is to monitor the impacts across the system, our system, right? However, we do recognize that Snohomish County is right next door here, right? So we have reached out to Snohomish County and will continue to have dialogue with them to see how we can share information to understand any potential implications that might also impact their system,
Okay.
as well as ours.
And are you taking in, when you do these studies and you're looking at things, are you taking into consideration the additional fuel costs and the environmental effect of having haulers travel further distances as well as residents travel further distances? Or is that part of your consideration? We just had a presentation from the PSRC about, traffic, and traffic's a big deal. And for the residents of Bothell, it's 405 to I-5 to Shoreline or 405 to South Bellevue. And that's big traffic, fuel consumption costs and time. And so that translates into, extra costs for haulers, extra time and fuel costs for residents if they're using the transfer station, as well as the effects on the environment. So are you guys considering that, and what's the dollar values that you're putting into that?
Yes, the environmental conditions, the traffic implications, service and cost implications are all elements that have been included in part of our studies. And as we're defining the scope of this pilot program, we have invited our cities through the advisory committees to help us identify the right measures to be monitoring through the pilot, because we're using this to inform the larger decision. What I can share with you is that through the modeling that we've done, we have looked at many of those elements, including the cost elements. There's a cost to provide service. There's going to be a cost, as you point out, if we ask haulers to drive further to go through and use either the shoreline or the Factoria station, that's a cost that would be incurred by your haulers and reasonably be expected to impact your residents as well. On the other hand, if we chose to build a transfer station, there's a cost to that. I can share with you it's significantly higher than the service alternative. That doesn't make it better or worse, but it is one of the elements. Cost is one of the elements. And that would ultimately also then be rolled in through the tipping fee and a cost passed on reasonably soon to be passed on to your constituents as well. So costs and environmental impacts as well as service impacts are all criteria that we are interested in monitoring and fully understanding so that we make these longer term decisions with the full kind of weight and interest of those in mind.
And the variable rate structure, would that be countywide?
The variable rate structure would be focused at Factoria Station. The idea is to, and it's not unlike how variable rate structures are used in other situations, we're trying to use a variable rate structure to incentivize or de-incentivize use of a station during peak hours. And so if you raise the price everywhere at the same time, it wouldn't motivate anyone to change habits. But if there's a differential price at one station, the purpose of the test is to see if consumers will act as they've indicated they will, because we've done some survey work to lead us up to this point. So the incentive-based pricing would be based at Factoria to incentivize use of that station during its extended hours.
So what I'm getting out of this so far is you have expected growth in Northeast King County. You're going to shut down a transfer station, and then you're going to charge people more to use it during business hours when it's going to be the busiest.
That is one option that the region has.
That sounds awful.
Yeah.
So that's just terrible. I mean, you're punishing the growth area.
Yeah.
You're punishing them is what you're doing. So, and then the other thing is, my understanding is that there's no cities that are willing to host a transfer station. Is that correct?
No, I don't. I wouldn't say that that's an accurate statement.
They're resistant to hosting a transfer station.
Well, there are cities that have come forward from time to time, and even in this conversation, that indicate an interest or a willingness to host a station. But the process of citing an essential public facility, such as a transfer station, has to go about a very designed process. We can't just identify, hey, Bothell, would you like to host one? And then we build one there. We actually have to look at the entire region and service area and deduct our way to the most appropriate locations. And we have to identify multiple alternatives and study the environmental impacts associated with all of them. So certainly having a willing host community is very helpful, but we need that at the end of the process, not just at the beginning.
So has there been consideration to putting it in unincorporated King County?
Well, again, that is a possible result, right? So we don't begin with where we want it or don't want it. We look at the service area, we look at the environmental impacts and what the feasible alternatives are. If it happened to be in an unincorporated area, that could work. I will share with you that through the urban growth boundaries, that is more likely to be complicated because some of often the services that you need for a transfer station, some of the wastewater and sewer services, as an example, may not be outside that urban growth boundary area. So it would really depend on that location. But we don't begin, again, with a location in mind. If through that siting process, it happened to be in an unincorporated area and met the rest of the criteria and had the right elements from an environmental standpoint, that could happen.
Okay, I really, I just don't understand anticipated growth and eliminating a transfer station as how that is good business and environmentally sound from a transportation and a traffic, trying to lessen traffic congestion for long travel times. And you're adding with this high volume, rate structure, I don't see how it's good for any of us up here in the Northeast. And I anticipate you'd have difficult time getting support for any of that stuff. And so anyway, thank you.
Well, yes, Councilmember, I appreciate your comments, and I can't tell you that this demand management approach is the best approach. And I can't tell you that building a transfer station is the best approach either. I think what we're trying to do is make sure that before that decision's made, we have a full, credible understanding of what the implications are, because we do take service to your citizens very seriously. We treasure the relationship that we have with the city of Bothell and the other 36 cities for which we have interlocal agreements. And we take our responsibilities for service and for environment very, very seriously. And so what we're trying to do has really been in response to what the cities have asked us to do, and that is give us, really a concrete basis for moving forward. Whether it's moving forward with a $95 million transfer station in the northeast part of the county, and we know how to do that. We know how to move forward with those types of projects, and we're willing to do that if that's the right thing to do. But we've been asked to prove whether or not these alternatives are a better choice. And we're asking for the city of Bothell and our other city partners to help us design this pilot program so that we capture the right type of elements through the pilot to really understand what the impacts are, so that when that long-term decision is made, we get it right.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. So it sounds like we have an opportunity here to actually engage in the process. And that's a good thing. One of the questions that I had following up on Councilmember Spivey, he answered most of the questions that I had, but what cities are actually involved right now in the process? When you talk about Northeast King County, what cities are actually in that advisory group or working with your group right now?
Well, I would say, virtually all the cities in the Northeast are pretty actively engaged. We have the advisory committee. There's about 28 of the 37 cities that are actively involved, but certainly, Bothell and Redmond and Kirkland and Woodinville and many, many others are regular contenders and participants in the process.
Okay, and the information that comes out of these committees, how would we go about if we wanted to research some of the past information coming? How would we go about doing that?
Well, we will happily provide any information that you'd like. Sabrina is an active member on one of those advisory committees. We refer to it as MSWAC. It's Metropolitan Solid Waste Advisory Committee. So we have the studies I referred to here today. She has direct access to those. We post these studies on our website, and if there's anything that you're not finding or just you're looking to get more direct to, we're happy to provide that information. You can ask me directly, or we'll work with Sabrina as well.
Okay, and I'll reach out to Sabrina and yourself as well, because I'm really curious about the pilot program and what sites you guys have kind of identified, if any, already for potential sites in that program. So I'd be curious to find that out.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Happy to work with you.
Okay, I have a few questions for you. So, do you have a ballpark of what it would cost to update Houghton so it could remain open?
No, primarily because I think it depends what you mean by update. You know, right now it is a functional station. It's we did some upgrades to it a few years back, adding a new roof and the sort. So, you know, I think it could be updated in a number of ways. I think it would depend on what that really meant to be able to answer what the fiscal implications would be.
So the Houghton transfer station doesn't need to be closed because it's decrepit. It just needs to be closed because why?
It was identified in the 2007 adopted transfer plan to be closed when replacement capacity was available. And at that time, the context of replacement capacity was a more modern transfer station. You know, Houghton, although it's functional, it's what we call a top load station. So we do not compact the waste as it's collected there. We do not offer recycling at that station. So, you know, it is, you know, somewhat of an old school service offering there. And at the time when it was identified to be replaced, it would be replaced with a more modern station that does have recycling services that allows us to compact the waste, which reduces outbound traffic by about a third. And it also provides a more modern station, provides enhanced environmental controls. So those were reasons it was identified to be replaced. But in terms of its core functionality, it works.
Okay. So you mentioned Snohomish County system is going to be coordinating. So we're half in Snohomish County. I'm sure you're aware of that. What kind of coordination are you trying to do, and do you need any help from us? Because we've seen some success as a council, just like the transportation system, for example, King County Metro, and then we've got community transit in Snohomish County. And the two need to talk, especially for our residents, because we use both, we're in both counties. So what is it that, do you need any help from us to try to get Snohomish County's attention on the solid waste discussion?
Well, I certainly appreciate the offer. I don't think I need any help yet. We've got a great relationship with the solid waste division there, and I've only just very recently reached out to that solid waste division director. So, you know, we haven't really even begun to dive in and discuss the details of this, because part of it, those details haven't been scoped out to their finality yet. And so as that process continues with our advisory committees, we'll also be keeping my intention anyhow, and I'm sure that they'll be interested to do that, keeping in communication with that solid waste organization as well. And my hopes are that we can share information as we have done in the past for other programs.
Okay. So last week we got a packet of information from Sabrina Combs, and one of the things it said in here is the MSWAC and the Demand Management Work Plan Subcommittee diligently exercised its advisory role during the long demand management pilot project planning process with little success in influencing final decisions. Can you shed some light on what that means?
Sure. First, I'll say that there were many decisions that the advisory committee, the subgroup, as well as the full advisory committee, had consensus on, and the division has maintained those elements. That includes, there were a number of things that we had to evaluate as to whether we were going to study in this demand management pilot or not. Decisions such as the regional direct rate, which is another rate structure that is available to customers. A decision was recommended by the subcommittee not to pursue that any further, and so we have concurred with that, and we're not. We're going to study an alternative low-cost bulky collection curbside pickup program. It was recommended we don't pursue that for various reasons, so we've concurred and of not doing that. There were recommendations around pursuing mandatory collection as a strategy. It was recommended we don't do that, and so at this point we've concurred as well. So there's a number of things actually that the subcommittee had recommended, and we agreed. There was one element that in particular that was suggested, and that was that the demand management be rolled out at all urban stations. And while we agree that we need to monitor the impacts across the system at urban stations and perhaps even the rural stations, The pricing element, the extended hours and pricing at all stations would have been problematic for the results. And again, our goal is to get credible results from this study that will inform the larger, longer reaching decision. And as I'd mentioned, if we, for instance, raise the price everywhere, if the goal was to try and get customers to use other stations at different hours, but we raise the price everywhere at the same time, well then I think it would be reasonable to conclude nobody's going to drive to a different station if it's the same price. They're going to just stay where they're at. So we did not move forward with that particular recommendation in the study, and we've decided that it would be most helpful to focus the incentive-based pricing and extended hours at Factoria only. And that was a departure from the recommendation of the subcommittee and the advisory committee as a whole.
And then, so is the demand management test pilot project, is that a $2 million endeavor?
It was actually, the answer is yes, is what it's, as it's presently scoped, it's a $2 million endeavor. I have to say that that's what is reflected in our rate proposal, or our adopted rate, I should say. The budget process is still underway, and so you know, the adopted rate will ultimately determine the funding, but it's budgeted. The proposed budget is $2 million. Yes.
Is that that's not just for the test project, but that's actually to implement the project within your budget period, or is it just the test project is $2 million?
That is the cost to implement and run the project.
Okay.
For the, it's essentially a 1-year project pilot.
It's a 1-year project. Okay. So do you feel like you will have creditable understanding of the system needs within, after the pilot project's completed?
Yes.
As the director? Okay. All right, those are my questions. Is there any other council members that wish to ask that hasn't? Nope. Thank you.
Thank you again for your time. Appreciate it.
We plan to participate actually in your regional committees here soon. So
Outstanding. We would welcome that as well. Thank you.
great, thank you. Okay, so review of upcoming public engagement opportunities. Maybe. There they are. Okay. The Waste Mobile will be here Friday, October 21st. I'm sorry, yeah. Friday, October 21st through Sunday, October 23rd from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Seattle Times building. There'll be a special city council meeting Tuesday, October 25th at 6 p.m. here at City Hall to discuss the 17-18 department budget presentations, and that's something that I encourage the public to tune in on. Safe Halloween event, Monday, October 31st from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Country Village. And there's also another one from 5 to 7 p.m. on Main Street. And the last one is Election Day, which is Tuesday, November 8th. Moving right along here.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
if
sir.
I might, just quickly on the Election Day, it's not just Election Day. Bothell has 2 measures on that ballot. One is an advisory measure on fireworks and whether there should be a ban in Bothell on fireworks or not, and there's no cost implication to that one. The other is the Safe Streets and Sidewalks measure, which we hope people will take a look at, and that would be 50 cents a thousand, but it would provide $4 million a year in improved street maintenance. So those are 2 measures that voters need to take a look at specifically and not get lost with this larger ballot on issues that are out there that same day.
Yeah, the gigantic ballot. The biggest one I think I've ever seen. Meeting agenda approval. So there's a couple things that I need to pull. I need to pull off a consent AB 16-173, approval of long-range planning work program, and I also need to pull AB 16-174, resolution establishing reimbursement area assessments. Is there any other changes to tonight's agenda? Seeing none. Review of projected agenda. Is there any changes to the projected agenda? Councilmember Agnew?
I'm not going to say.
Not going to say it again, okay. He's a little concerned about the November 1st meeting agenda, but I told him too bad. Any other projected agenda changes? Seeing none. Okay, so we are into the remainder of the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the remainder of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Agnew. Place your votes. Voice vote? Okay. Okay. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Sandberg absent and excused. So I pulled AB 16-173, which is the approval of long-range planning work program, and there was a last-minute change to the long-range planning work program, and I believe somebody has it. Yep. ahead.
I can quickly, there's Dave, but if you have questions about the work plan itself, I think Dave can answer, but the only change was we forgot to add in the facade improvement discussions into the first quarter of 2017. We had that on the strategic calendar, but we didn't get it on here. So that's now been added. So I don't know, Dave, if you have any other comments on that, I think the work plan is pretty ambitious.
Could you explain what the facade improvements, what that is?
Well, and there is a footnote related to that. So the downtown plan has a historic resources element that does have design guidelines for the historic resources along Main Street and the surrounding blocks of downtown. Staff is also working on facade improvement program, bringing in a UW storefront studio to have students develop proposals for working with business and property owners. So there is no code amendment, from our perspective, no code amendment necessary, but and none has been initiated at this point. But we did want to put that there as just part of the work program.
And it's the Main Street facades, correct?
We haven't, as far as the storefront studio, we haven't specifically scoped it exclusively to Main Street, but that would be the focus.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, the discussion we've had, Dave and Deputy Mayor Durr and I, the city has design guidelines that we use, and those are soft, if you will. We basically meet with folks, we try to encourage them to move in that direction. We're also looking at establishing a loan fund that would actually help make facade improvements. There, we're saying the suggestion there is if you want the city's money, those guidelines become more mandatory. And so they essentially become de facto standards. If you want our cash, it has strings attached. So the idea is not to make it a firm regulatory process, but if you really want to borrow the low interest loans that we're planning to set up, then that would be the direction we would go. The other issue that Dave mentioned, I'm glad he mentioned it, I forgot, is once people decide they do want to go ahead and make some facade improvements and they've met the standards that are set for the loan, then the UW architectural students would actually be in a position to actually help come in and do some design concepts for them and actually help jumpstart that work. The whole idea is that the downtown merchants would be able to coordinate their activities along with the same time that the engineering staff is doing the Main Street redevelopment, that work. So that's why we're trying to fast track all of that so it all ties together.
Okay.
But Dave's right, there's no code change that we're planning.
So, Mr. Boyd, do you have the updated work plan there on the projector, or is it in our packets? So everybody can see. Oh, it is.
It was circulated just before the meeting, and I could put it on
Okay.
the overhead.
So it's on there. It's still not given a specific month out of the 2 years to be worked on.
Yeah, that was just a late, last-minute addition today. It doesn't need to go to Planning Commission or Council. It's more of a staff work item at this point.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
I'd just like to make one comment on that, and that is to make sure that you include the Landmark Board in those discussions.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
And Sarah Church Desimone, our historic preservation consultant who coordinates the Landmark Board, is definitely involved with us on the storefront studio planning.
Great. So you've labeled everything else PC or CC, so maybe that one's a LPB. Thanks.
Sure.
Is there any other questions from council, or we can make a motion to move with the amendment?
So moved.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Agnew. Should we try the buttons again? Yeah? All right, place your vote. Passes unanimously. Councilmember Sandberg absent and excused. So then the last one we have is AB 16-174, resolution establishing reimbursement area assessments. And I believe we have Mr. Fiend to provide a brief staff presentation. Then we wanted to have an opportunity for the public to comment.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Don Fiend, Utility and Development Services Manager. And this is the resolution establishing the downtown reimbursement area. Recap of what we covered before when we were addressing the new ordinances for the reimbursement agreements. These are also referred to as recovery contracts or latecomers agreements that allow a property owner who has installed street or utility improvements to recover a portion of the costs of those improvements from other property owners who later develop property in the vicinity and use those improvements. And to recap also, the city can be the recipient of that reimbursement. And there's RCWs covering that. The reimbursement is to be a pro rata share of design, construction, and contract administration costs of the street and/or utility project. It's determined by a method of cost apportionment based on the benefit to the property owner from the project, and staff recommends costs be apportioned on a linear foot basis in this case. The necessary public improvements in the downtown revitalization area have been constructed by a combination of developer projects and city public work projects. And the cost apportionment of those public system improvements to the downtown area is detailed in the 2011 Downtown Revitalization Utility Phasing Cost Partitioning and Financing Study. The details of the cost splits and rationale for the downtown's infrastructure improvements were discussed in 2011, and they've been used ever since in regard to purchase and sales and developer agreements. The improvements in the area included the Horse Creek utility and frontage improvements. The actual Horse Creek storm system is funded separately through the downtown stormwater facility charges. Also, the multi-way boulevard frontage and utility improvements and the utility projects on 98th Avenue West. Developers in many of the instances, such as Six Oaks, have constructed those required public infrastructure improvements. The city has been reimbursed also for several projects it's constructed through purchase and sales agreements. The remaining projects constructed by the city that benefit the downtown properties will be covered by the proposed reimbursement resolution. And we'll have to, after this council session tonight, we'll come back with an item for adoption on November 15th. In your packet, the reimbursement area ordinance has 3 exhibits. Exhibit A is the map of the area. Exhibit B defines projects and delineates project costs on a per lineal foot basis. And then there's a list in Exhibit C that shows the reimbursement cost for each property. The reimbursements would then be due upon development and connection to the system improvements. So here's a map showing the parcels that would be assessed. We've also detailed the costs that are backed up by our capital team from projects that have constructed those improvements. And finally, we have Exhibit C, which is the reimbursement assessment roll. With that, the staff recommends approval of the resolution to take final action on the ordinance establishing the reimbursement area in the downtown revitalization area. If approved, 20-day notice will be issued to the property owners, And then we would have final ordinance presented to council for approval on November 15th unless a public hearing is requested. With that, I can take on any questions.
So I guess I'm confused then, because in our packet it says to adopt the proposed resolutions. So now you're asking the council to
It is a resolution tonight
approve a resolution.
to move forward with.
And that-
Right.
Okay. Okay, is there anybody in the public that would wish to speak to this item? Seeing none. Is there any questions from council? Councilmember Freed?
Don, nice to see you again so early in the evening. It's nice to have you here. So why, in past latecomers agreements that I've been involved with, I've seen that the city takes in consideration density per block and places a burden more on blocks that are, say, if we have one block and develop 100 units versus the neighboring block that's zoned to go only to 25 units. In this way that we're doing with lineal frontage, it places an equal burden on both, but it's greater, actually, not equal price on both, but it's a greater burden, obviously, on the smaller density project. So why wouldn't we come up with a system rather than lineal frontage, focus on density?
I think we're assuming that people are going to want to build to the max density of the zoning, which is pretty consistent throughout the
Downtown core.
Downtown.
I could see that on the blocks that are fronting on the boulevard, but when you step back to the blocks that are where the Dawson building was and the library, those blocks there going north, those are, as I recall, they are a lower density than the ones on the boulevard.
Sure, but the improvements still benefit them, the same. The same way.
Well, I agree.
I mean, there's a number of ways we could look at it. I think we believe this is the simplest and least complicated and still fair and equitable.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree that all these improvements are benefiting each of the projects or property owners in downtown. I think it's a positive thing we're doing this, and I'm certainly a fan of latecomers agreements to help reimburse the city, or even vice versa. If a developer came in, established a sewer line, that they would get a reimbursement. And we're not looking at this for the whole city, I understand. So it's a bit easier here. I'd probably argue a little bit harder if we're talking about a latecomers agreement that we're going to establish for the whole city. But I still wonder, again, if we had some of these, I think like the Six Oaks building, where 250 units, where across the street the zoning is stepped down and they could only develop 100 units. It seems odd to place an equal cost on both of those blocks, because obviously you can water down the impact on the 250 units versus the 100 unit site. Both will build to the max, but it's going to per unit cost a lot more for the neighboring site.
Sure, it'd probably make for a pretty complicated exercise, but I mean, there's a number of ways it could be done. I think we felt this was the best way.
Okay, well, I appreciate your efforts on it. I'm certainly a fan of something that is more equal treatment for all, which this, I think, is, because of zoning is placed on a property, it is unequal treatment. But thank you, Don.
Councilmember Spivey?
Great, thank you. Don, so I'm looking at attachment 2. It's the map that shows all the parcels that would be affected.
Sure.
All these that are on the east side of the multi-way boulevard, so you've got like Cafe Ladro and the Pediatric and Hand Clinic and the ranch, all those properties. Will those properties be assessed if they're redeveloped, or
If they're redeveloped.
only redeveloped? So the current uses will not have an assessment?
No, for a period up to 15 years. If they're redeveloped during the next 15 years, they would be subject. But if they don't, they wouldn't.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor?
So when I look at this map and try to process what Councilmember Freed said, am I interpreting it correctly that some of those parcels that are for instance, I think you're talking about the townhouses, it looks like there's no assessment anyway.
Right. The townhouses N and O wouldn't, or outside the area. They're actually constructing some improvements, and PSA's covered some, and so they're not subject to it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Don, does it cost more to do frontage improvements in front of a 500-unit building compared to a 100-unit building?
No.
All right, thank you. Do you have a question? Councilmember McNeil?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm looking at the map that actually has the costs associated with it. And if we go up to the corner where Cafe Ladro is, how do I tell, are they going to get assessed twice? Is there two different sides to their property or just one?
It's just one. So it is, it's just half. The way we, on the partitioning study, the kind of the guideline for the whole downtown that we did in 2011, for a frontage improvement, it's just, you're only paying for your side. For a sewer, or a water line that would be in the middle of the street serving both sides, you'd only pay half. So it's portioned half to each side. Now, some of these ones on the other half, once again, have constructed improvements and other things, so that they aren't subject, such as minimums on the other side.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, do we have a motion to pass the resolution?
I move the recommended action.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Agnew. Go ahead, place your votes. Are we doing hand vote?
No, I'd like to make a comment.
Okay, Councilmember Freed.
Great. So, Don, appreciate the work that you and your team did on this. I do believe a more fair and equitable system is to, when you have a latecomers agreement, look at the zoning on each block and do an allocation of what projected development could be on that lot and place a financial value on that. That's systems that I've seen work in the region. So I won't be voting in support of this. And I know there was a question if the costs are the same in the road. It is. The city is paying for it in this regard, and so it's more fair to look at different blocks and place different values in each block, so each citizen ultimately that will pay this going forward is equally treated. So I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Any other deliberation on the motion? Seeing none, are the buttons working? All right, since we have a dissenting, go ahead. So if you are in support of the motion, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Passes 5-1 with Councilmember Sandberg absent and excused and Councilmember Freed in the negative. Okay, so moving along, we have, there it is, the visitor comment section. So each person addressing the city council will give his or her name in an audible tone of voice for the record, and unless council grants further time, shall limit the address to 3 minutes. All remarks will be addressed to the council as a body and not to any member thereof. No person other than the council and the person having the floor will be permitted to enter into any discussion either directly or through a member of the council without the permission of the mayor. We do have a couple of items later on our agenda, so if you're here for the continued public hearing on the Fitzgerald sub-area, we will have an opportunity for public comment then. And same for the public hearing on the campus master planning process for the University of Washington Bothell Cascadia. And we will also have public comment for the study session regarding the legislative agenda. So if there's anything else you'd like to talk to the council about during the visitor section, please come up to the podium. I don't have any sign-up sheets, so.
Thank you. Dick Paler, 9013 Northeast 190th Street here in Bothell. I'm here tonight to talk about the sound transit tax measure on the ballot, and I'm frankly here to beg my fellow Bothell citizens to vote against this. I think it's a very bad deal for the city of Bothell. The taxpayers of Bothell, if this passes, would be contributing taxes to this, frankly, forever. The taxes will never be rolled back, despite what you're being told. But under, if everything was perfect, the soonest they'd be rolled back is 55 years from now. So we're talking about a very huge commitment. And the amount of taxes that residents of Bothell would pay to Sound Transit every year would be multiples of what our own TIP project list is, of which, as all of you know, we don't have nearly enough money to fund those projects. And the passage of this, we would be committing literally multiples of that amount of money, sending it out of the city, frankly, to fund a Seattle project. And we go without being able to fund our own projects in the city. Again, I'm in favor of the Safe Streets levy here because I want to keep the money at home. But this is just a bad deal for the city of Bothell. 1% is what you get out of this. Sound Transit admits that this project, when it's completed 25 years from now, if it's on time, would generate a mere 32,000 new riders each day. That's nothing. That's less than 1% of the trips that are projected to be in the region in a day in 2040, when the projects would be finished, again, if they're on time. We'd be raising taxes, again, as I mentioned, literally indefinitely. It would also give Sound Transit access to now a new property tax. We all know that the state legislature has been found in contempt by the Supreme Court because we're not fully funding education. Yet this would dedicate property taxes to Sound Transit that would be needed to make the funding obligation for education. So if, again, there's another reason, think education is a higher priority than this project. Next, this is an outdated solution. This is trains as you've known it, forever, more than a decade, or excuse me, more than a century. The future is innovation in transportation. Sound Transit doesn't take into account any of the new innovation that is coming down the road in the future. Again, it's a bad deal for Bothell. The current CEO of Sound Transit was previously, his previous job was, he was head of the Federal Transit Administration appointed by President Obama. And in 2010, when he spoke to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, he said, he pointed out that the transit system, Boston's transit system, is in a grim state. Okay, I'll cut to the chase. He made his argument that a lot of cities, instead of trying to spend money on expensive rail systems, should be investing in bus rapid transit. Community Transit has got a new plan for bus rapid transit that will do way more for us than the light rail investment. Yet the CEO gets brought in here now. Now he's saying, now that he's here on this job, he's saying we should have $54 billion worth of light rail. Again, I beg our fellow citizens of Bothell to vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paylor. Is there anybody else that would like to speak in the public comment period?
Patrick Ewing, 19612 109th Place Northeast here in Bothell. It's not very often I get to come up here and say I agree with Dick Paylor, but I do. So Dick and I had the pleasure of serving on several regional committees together. One was the I-405 Corridor Study Committee and also Eastside Transportation Partnership. And I agree with the previous speaker that not only is this not a good deal for the citizens of Bothell, it's not a good deal for most of the cities here on the east side because it doesn't serve us. We're taxed equally amongst the rest of the region, but we here in Bothell and most of the east side cities don't see the benefit of it. So we pay a lot of money, we don't get the benefit. When you look for what to do for 405, where we see this huge congestion all day long, well, we saw the toll lanes didn't work so well. What the study, or I-405 study identified as the best option and the committee recommended was bus rapid transit on the east side. Well, unfortunately, that has never gone, we haven't gone down that path and proceeded with the recommended solution for the east side, which is to improve bus transportation loans, give them bus dedicated lanes, get dedicated on-ramps, off-ramps to get the traffic moving in buses rapidly on the east side. So that is the cost-effective solution for providing us congestion relief on the east side. So I would agree with Dick to not vote yes on the sound transit proposal and send it back to hopefully get something more reasonable to serve the citizens on the east side. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll go into AB 16-175, which is the fourth public hearing regarding the planning code amendments for the Fitzgerald 35th Southeast and Canyon Creek 39th Southeast subarea plans and Bothell Municipal Code 12.50 and 12.52. I believe I need to reopen the public hearing. Yep. So I'm officially opening the public hearing. We'll have a staff presentation by Mr. Tom Burdette, the Community Development Director, and Bruce Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Tonight, we have brought forward information that helps bring further changes to the code concerning the Fitzgerald area. As you remember, this has come a long way. We've had several stakeholder workshops that were held in May and June of this year. We've explored the envelopes very well in terms of different types of changes that could be made in the area. We went from prescriptive to demonstrative type approaches in regulating the zoning implementation in this area. We brought forward to the council three different options of keeping us zoning with status quo, bringing forward a hybrid approach, and a third option focusing on critical areas and code changes to terminate overlay regulations. The council selected the hybrid approach. That's likely to have the best solution that will work for that will work for the variety of interests within the area, and it's probably the option that's going to bring as much peace to the land as we can probably find. We've had great feedback throughout the process. I can't thank all of the stakeholders enough for their participation and the input that the staff has had. It's been overwhelming at times, but it's also been absolutely beneficial to the process and allowing staff to understand better some of the relationships and some of the physical attributes of the property that we're regulating. So for that, we're very grateful. Tonight, we would like to go over some of the changes to the sub-area overlay with council. We've prepared a draft of that ordinance. We've provided you with sort of a final version of that. We can produce a legislative draft of it, a legislative markup. If that makes it easier for the council, we'll be happy to get that distributed. Also, we've proposed a clustering code, which is an amendment that we would like to assert into the code, directed by council to bring forward clustering. That is focused primarily on single family. If we were to make recommendations citywide, we would probably broaden that a little bit, but for the Fitzgerald area, we think it's a good fit and would work well. Whether or not those clustering, whether that clustering proposal is viewed as optional at the selection of the property owner or required, that's something that council can give us input on. We'd be happy to work on it, whatever, in a way that you direct us. And then changes to the baseline zoning in Zone 1. Various times we've suggested some different ways that we could do that, and I think the council really wanted to see what's possible under cluster option before giving us specific direction on what to do with the baseline zoning in Zone 1. So with that as an introduction, we have followed the recommendations of the hybrid approach, and that is we would take Zone 1 out of the overlay. We would add a provision, an opt-out provision for 40,000 square foot lots to be able to be divided. And then we've brought forward those code amendments, which I'll turn the time over to Bruce to go over with the council.
Good Mayor, members of the council. Sorry it took so long. It took a while to find this one. As you have identified, this is the fourth City Council public hearing on this topic. The council review directions sought this evening includes three primary items: the draft code amendments, which you have in your packet, which is attachment 2 to the packet, the draft clustering mechanism, which is also an attachment 2, as well as the zoning classification to assign to the Zone 1 areas. As Director Burdett identified, that areas east of 39th Avenue would be removed from the North Creek Fish and Wildlife Critical Habitat Protection Area and assigned a different zoning designation, which has not been determined yet. The council has provided some past direction on this area, and of course, one of course is to remove the Zone 1 areas, which is east of 39th, from the North Creek Fish and Wildlife Critical Habitat Protection Area. And we're hoping the council agrees with staff to allow us to shorten that term to North Creek Protection Area, because it's just much easier to say. The other item that the council has identified is a desire to implement a clustering mechanism within Zone 1 to preserve additional forested lands and or areas with mature trees. And that was a really important feature that council identified. The other thing the council identified was that there was a desire to retain the protections of the Ordinance 1988. And that's basically the LID overlay designation as it exists today for lands west of 39th Avenue Southeast. Further, the council identified that there was a real desire to improve the readability and clarity of the LID overlay provisions, as well as include an opt-out provision for individual single-family residential or large lot, 40,000 square foot size, short plats. Now, the potential clustering approaches that's in the council review draft propose a number of things. One would be to use the planned unit development PUD process to evaluate clustering proposals. The other would be a lot yield, and that would basically be a very simplified methodology where you divide the net buildable area by the zoning classification's minimum lot area. And we'll get a little bit more into that later on. Open space, preserve 15 to 30% of the net buildable area of the site as a means to get that type of open space that the council has identified it desires. The type of open space to preserve, this is fairly straightforward. Intact forests, lands with mature trees, as well as forest equivalent LID facilities. Now, as you recall from the presentations by parametrics, forest equivalent LID techniques are the things like rain gardens, bioinfiltration, things that mimic a forest function. Lot area and circle allow a 50% reduction in the lot area and the lot circle. And essentially, for example, if you're an R9600 zone, the lot area would be 4,800 and the lot circle would be 40 feet. As well as, of course, you may want to consider modifying building coverage and side yard setback provisions. We may have a situation, I want the development community to respond to this, but you could have a potential disincentive to clustering if you make the lot small but also require a very, very small house. We may have to do some more work on that. And as Director Burdett identified, there may be a desire to make this a mandatory or an optional provision. Those are two important actually provisions to speak to. Now, As far as lands within the NCPA, the draft before you retains a number of the existing Ordinance 1999 LID overlay standards, including the 60% forest cover, a 20% maximum effective impervious surface cover, limits the amount of ground and grade disturbance, requires submit of additional studies, and there's quite a large list of those, as well as retains a number of the special building design standards, including the prohibition on intruding into the saturated soil conditions and some of the other special provisions within that ordinance currently. The proposal also simplifies a number of items within the overlay. Basically simple things like placing all the special submittal items within one area so they're easy to find, removing a lot of the duplicative language. We had a lot of language that either matched or was very similar to other code language, and it just makes no sense to include all those things within one area. As well as, of course, reducing the complexity of the forest and the effective impervious area transfer provisions. We still believe that is a viable mechanism, but we would have to do it. One of the things that this proposal does is it updates a number of the existing ordinance 1988 LID by emphasizing the use of forest equivalent LID facilities. And again, as identified, those are the type of facilities that parametrics has identified are really important to maintaining your good groundwater effective infiltration as well as matching the evapotranspiration that occurs there. De-emphasizing some other types of LID techniques that aren't quite as successful. Things like reverse slope sidewalks, vegetated roof, those things don't have near as much effectively, are not as effective as the other types of forest equivalent things. Finally, implementing a 65-10 surface water flow control. That's basically where you match the flow control from the site as if it's a 65% forested condition or 10% impervious surface condition. Now, I also included the statement from parametrics regarding their opinion of the current draft proposal before you. And I don't want to read the whole thing because it'd take me quite a while. But basically what they've identified is that they believe that this draft provides commensurate protection of the area consistent with Ordinance 1988. And that's the professionals that we have hired to give us those type of information. Now, I want to talk a little bit about clustering. This is kind of a little bit different area. Again, as I identified, use the PUD process, establish a little bit different lot yield maximum, identify minimum open space, identify the type of open space, identified the maximum allowed lot area and lot circle reduction, building coverage, hard surface coverage, as well as some of the special street standards that are in Ordinance 1988. Essentially what happened, that ordinance has a bunch of provisions that allow streets to be a little bit narrower. And that all goes to reducing the amount of impervious surface on a property. Going to spend a little bit of time on some basics here. We created a kind of a test site, if you would, just to have an idea of what kind of effects some of the different techniques would have. And within the city of Bothell, critical areas and critical area buffers identified in these white areas and street rights of way are deducted from the gross site area. Once you do that deduction, you have the net buildable area, and that's in the shaded blue area here. So as you can see, what happens is that you have a site of 231,000 square feet. You deduct those areas, you get basically a net buildable area of 165,000 square feet and change. That's where you start to apply the zoning provisions. For example, the current regulations have a set lot area and lot circle. Basically, the lot circle controls the width and the depth of a property. And this basically diagram shows the differences between the detached single-family residential zones within the city of Bothell. We have 4, well 5 with the 40,000, but that's not one of the items that I think we're talking about. And basically what this does is it just tells you how many acres are covered by 5 lots within each of these different zoning categories. And you can see, of course, that R9600 all the way down to 5400, you have quite a bit of difference there in both the area and the width of the lots. Now, the figure to the right basically shows the building coverage. Now again, within our single family zones, we allow buildings, and that's the primary structure and accessory structure, to cover up to 35% of the lot. And essentially what that would mean is in the 9600, the building can cover up to 3,300 square feet down to 5,400E, which is basically 1,890 square feet. So that gives you a relative idea of what the different building cover provisions are for each of those zoning categories. Now, when I talk about a lot by lot layout, what basically happens is you determine what your buildable net buildable area is, and then you apply those minimum lot areas and minimum lot circles to the site. And essentially what happens is you can start anywhere you want to and just start laying out those lots until you get to the maximum allowed underneath that lot by lot approach. The item on the left is a 9600 designation, 15 lots were on this area. The one on the right is an R7200 designation. You got 20 lots that you were able to fit on the actual site. One of the things that I identified here is that, I'll talk about that in a moment because I think it's important. We did a couple of scenarios, and one of the things we like to do is we like to understand what are the possible options and what are the possible benefits of doing this type of clustering. And essentially the item on the left would be an R9600 clustering at a 50% lot reduction and using the yield calculation of 1214.030B3. Now B3 is the calculation where you actually take the net buildable area and divide it by the underlying zoning, and that gets you a number. That's basically what this does, and you can see it says we get to 17 when we apply the 9600. If you go over to the right, that's the 7200. Again, you take the net buildable area divided by 7,200, and that gets you a number. And then what you do is you apply your clustering, your lot size variances, and you start, we basically identify how much open space you can preserve. As you can see, either one of these scenarios, you do this type of a clustering, you have a very large potential for preserving some open space. So it's a really important concept that I know as staff we are excited about because we would love to see something like this. Now, Councilmember McNeil offers a suggestion for us to do real world numbers, and he was absolutely correct. And I wanted to put this up here because we did kind of a straight zoning estimate, and that's kind of what we do because it has a tendency to be on the high side. But it's also a really good idea to apply what we really are seeing in the field when we do these projects. And this is a classic situation here. You have the R9600 designation. A straight zoning estimate is 101 lots, but a real world estimate is about 73 to 93. And there's that change, and I just basically wanted to call this out because I thought it was a really smart thing to identify for us. Now, real quickly, we do have a staff recommendation that's a little bit different than was our last one. And basically what that is we believe the 9600 designation is a good one to apply to the lands, to lands east of 39th Avenue. And essentially what you can see here is this is the current LID overlay. I'm going to outline that a little bit. This area east of 39th Avenue would be removed from the LID overlay and would be assigned a different zoning designation, in this case R9600, or another designation as the council so desires. The lands just slightly west of 39th Avenue, which are now 5400A, would also have a new designation, R9600, but it'd have the LID assignment because it would remain within the LID overlay area. So that's kind of how this would play out, that we would have a different zoning designation here as well as here, and we would continue the North Creek Protection Area provisions to the west of 39th Avenue. So I think I'll stop at that point because I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and we can of course take public testimony, but that concludes my statements. Thank you.
Thank you. Does council have a preference if we take public comment now, or do you want to wait and ask questions? Okay, let's do public comment now. So same rules apply as the visitors section. I could reread those if we need to, but I think everybody was here. So I have no sign-up sheets at all. So if anybody would like to come and provide testimony to the council, please do so. Oh, do we have a sign-up sheet? That's not mine.
I wanted to use the document camera. Is it just, how do you use a document camera?
We do have a sign-up sheet, and Suzanne, you're there. You're number one on the list.
There we go. Well, good evening. Suzanne Burnell, Bothell resident, licensed geologist and hydrogeologist in the state of Washington. And I wanted to make some comments tonight on the Agenda Bill staff report and to provide some points of clarification, and I'll provide some written comments, but just to hit a couple of the highlights in the 3 minutes that I have. First off, Mr. Paul Fent with Parametrics was identified as a hydrogeologist, a groundwater specialist. He is not. Mr. Paul Fent is not licensed as a groundwater geologist or a hydrogeologist in the state of Washington. I think that's important because they're referencing hydrogeologists. I have submitted the documentation from the Washington Department of Licensing to the city clerk that substantiates my statement. Secondly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Agenda Bill staff report. Again, Mr. Paul Fent is referenced very heavily as a reference for parametrics and for the groundwater depth to groundwater. And this is page 7 of the staff report for tonight. Mr. Fent's comments are referenced here, but there's no exhibit number, no reference, no date or time, no indication of when this testimony was provided in the public record, and yet his testimony is used to state that, and I circled it here, that groundwater, shallow groundwater is at 8 to 15 feet below ground surface. Page 7 of the staff report. Page 8 of the staff report provides this air photo, and actually it's great. It shows zone 1. It shows test pit data that was collected primarily in 2015, and it shows here that shallow groundwater was detected at, we've got 3 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet, 4.5 feet in zone 1, 4.5 feet below ground surface just out of zone 1, 4 feet in zone 1, and admittedly at depths greater than 4 feet in other areas. And I guess what I want to point out is this is, in fact, best available science. This is what should have been in the Parametrics best available science memo in May. This data has been available for well over a year. Not just this data, but other geotechnical data, Department of Ecology soil boring and well log data, Brightwater data, and even North Creek water quality data. All this data was available a year ago, and it didn't show up in the parametrics either of the draft memo. The Growth Management Hearings Board has directed City Council to use best available science, whether it supports my agenda or someone else's agenda. And yet, it's not been included or referenced in the public testimony. I think it's very hard for you to make decisions and craft legislation when you don't have all the best available science. And last year was actually a drought year. So the fact that, in fact, Governor Inslee in 2015 declared a statewide drought emergency. So the data that's here was actually collected during a drought, and yet we still have groundwater at 3 feet in zone 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person on the list is Ann Agard.
Thank you. Ann Agard at 16524 104th Northeast. I want to follow up on a couple of statements that Suzanne made and add some more regarding the latest draft. The last thing Suzanne said was that you are required to use best available science, and the board has emphasized this in their July 21st, 2015 zone. And in addition, they pointed out that counties and cities must protect areas and ecosystems. And the development regulations may not allow a net loss of the function and values of ecosystems. So this map that you see, particularly this wetland here, which is now, as you know from your agenda package, is almost 33% of the Zone 1 and is being proposed to be taken out from under the regulations of LID. Clearly, this wetland is adjacent to, if not connected to, if not the same as the adjacent wetland. And if you look up here, you see this is where the stream Cold Creek comes through into the wetlands, and ultimately it all drains down into North Creek. It is all one ecosystem. And under the board's ruling, under GMA, under your own regulations, which are still in here under 1252, you may not allow any degradation of that ecosystem. So, in summary, the Parametrics 2006 statement says that, in summary, the hydrologic cycle is key to maintaining the function of streams and the web of aquatic organisms that depend upon them. Development of any density may avoid adverse effects on water resources only if vegetation cover is maintained that preserves the natural functions of evapotranspiration and infiltration, and this generally means maintenance of extensive areas that function as does native forest cover. And secondly, the amount of impervious surface is limited, or stormwater management, including infiltration system, limit the runoff to levels that do not result in erosion and destabilization of stream channels. Your removal of Zone 1 is in direct violation of the decision by the Growth Management Board on July 21st that invalidated the ordinance. And until you find a way to protect the streams, the wetlands, and the forests above a 15 to 30% level of open space that ultimately may evolve into simply a preservation of the forest equivalent bioretention facilities, you will not pass muster. And this is what this current code does. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Andrea Perry.
Andrea Perry. Okay, a couple things. One, Bruce was talking about a legislative version, or Tom was, I can't remember. I'm not sure if that's the same as a strike-through version, but that definitely needs to be part of the record, and I would hope that the council would want to see it. I can guarantee you that the public wants to see that. It's a better way of seeing a comparison to make sure that everything that needs to be there is still there, and you can see where the differences are. Also, I had submitted on October 12th, it wasn't in your exhibit list, but I submitted some questions. Some of them they're based on the draft version that was submitted to the Department of Commerce, but I think that they're still relevant. The staff talked about the clustering provisions being based on a white paper that was submitted to council. I don't see that on the exhibit list. I've never heard about it. And so I'm wondering, who was the technical author of this white paper? Where is it? I'd like to see a copy of that. Then Bruce was talking about the amount of open space that could be saved by clustering, and the example he showed was 9,600, and that there was 45% saved open space. So I'm trying to understand how that relates to the 15 to 30% minimum that you need to save to be able to do clustering. And what was the basis? I mean, originally in the draft it was 25 to 30. Now it's changed to 15 to 30. And I'm still wondering, where did that number come from? How did they conclude that? Did they look at the urban tree canopy study, which showed that in Fitzgerald as a whole, it's at 60% right now, the forest cover. So why would it be as low as 15% is all that you would need to say if you were going to cluster? when you talk about the type of open space, there's a list and preference, but it doesn't, it just goes down the list. You do this, or you do this next, or you do the third step. But what's the criteria? I mean, how do you prove that you couldn't save intact forest land all the way through? Show a mechanism on what you would have to go through to show that you tried the first preferred all the way down to the fourth preferred. That, I don't see that in the code, so that's what I'm wondering about. On impervious surface, the staff has suggested a 20% based on some study. We've been asking, where's the data that shows this? What area are you basing that on? And we've never heard. It's not in the exhibit list. It's never been in any of the public sessions. Where did they come up with the 20% number? Currently, it's 15% in the R40,000 and 20% in the R9600. So I'm just trying to understand, where did that 20% number come from? We need to see that documented. I have others. I'll go ahead and mail them in. Hopefully they won't make it into the exhibit list next time. Thank you.
Thank you. We're at the end of the sign-up sheet. Is there anybody else that would like to provide public comment?
Okay. I'm George Merritt. I'm a property owner up there. I just like to say, like the wetlands they're talking about, I own part of that on some of my property. So, I mean, our standard zoning protects it. I mean, it's protected under typical zoning anyway, so it's not like it's unprotected in the buffer. My argument is, due to the pit tests and the other science provided by parametrics, I think it's been shown that this property should be able to be developed. And it had an R5400 zoning. And now that you want to lift the LID, which most of you agreed should be done, you also seem to agree that clustering is a good idea, yet you want to limit the zoning density to a point to where clustering doesn't make sense. If you limit the density too far, developers have already said that they're going to build bigger houses on large lots. There would be no incentive to cluster. I mean, if they could only build 80 houses on 22 acres, why would they utilize clustering? I mean, you got to get the zoning down to where clustering makes some sense. You know, so what are they going to build? 80 houses on quarter-acre lots that are $1 million to $1.5 million instead of building something more affordable? You need to get enough density up there so they build something that does what's required, which is to provide housing, which is very much necessary. You need more housing. The other thing is, you know, you've talked about traffic before. We're at the end of the line of traffic. I have access to 405, 2 places less than 3 miles from my house. I am not causing traffic when I go to work in the morning. I'm at the freeway. When I get off the freeway, I'm home. The traffic is coming from the north, where all the houses have been built. So, I mean, if there was ever an area that should have density and something should be done to be built up there, it's this area. I mean, people could walk to the business parks and go to work. We've got the UW Cascadia. We've got a lot of access that's closer than all the other houses in the area that have been built. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of houses built to the north of me, and yet here I am, minutes from the freeway, and you guys want to do nothing but limit the density up there. The pit test and the science has determined that this property should be able to be built on, and it should be built on a density that meets the need for housing. There's a need for housing that's more affordable. You're going to force the developers to build over $1 million houses on large lots because clustering makes no sense if you don't allow enough density to make use of it. There was something else I wanted to say. Well, anyway, I just urge, if you are going to go off 5400, to allow density credit for wetlands also. I own some wetlands. I have a couple other neighbors that do. This is going to seriously impact the value of our properties by not getting credit for the buffer zones. To me,
Could you wrap up your comments, sir? Please.
Anyway, I'd like you to allow for the buffers to have credit for density, because density is needed up there to make clustering work and to provide the housing that is needed for the area at a more affordable price. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there any more comments? I don't have any more on the sign-up sheet.
Jim Phillips, 23223 39th Avenue Southeast. First thing I really wanted to say, I don't know how many of you have been up in that area and have looked at the property. Coal Creek is not in the city of Bothell, east of 39th. It does not come into the city of Bothell until quite a ways west of 39th. And that is in an area that you've already established your LID and all of those critical area regulations. There are some wetlands in a couple of spots, but your critical areas ordinance and the new stormwater ordinances more than take care of it. I mean, that's why they're there. So I really urge you to consider R7200 zoning on the property east of 39th. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more? Oh, there was one more. Go ahead.
Patrick Ewing, 19612 109th Place, Northeast Bothell. I spoke to you on June 21st, and asked you to place some exhibits into the record. They are not on the list. These are 3 environmental studies that have been quoted frequently by your staff, by your environmental consultant, and by the public. So they're effectively already in the record, but it's incumbent on you as the mayor, Mr. Mayor, as the chair, to make sure that you've got a clear record. So these 3 reports that are being referenced need to be available so people can understand them in their entirety, not just taking a bit here and there. If the council needs to go look for reference, or the public wants to go look for the reference, what the whole study says, they need to have it available as an electronic document that they can go take a look at. So the 3 documents again were the 2004 Lewitz report from Pentec, the best available science report from Stewart and Associates. I've seen the date to 2004 referenced. The copy I have at home is 2005, so I think the 2005 is the final version. And then the 2006 parametrics study that's referenced in tonight's staff report many times. Some other thoughts for you. I would request that you keep the name Nick Fuchapwa, even though it is a mouthful. What you're eliminating is some very important words that were very thoughtfully put into the original ordinance. It's in the North Creek Fish and Wildlife Critical Habitat Protection Area. If you just shorten it to the North Creek Protection Area, you've lost a lot of what these code amendments were meant to do, to protect the fish and wildlife habitat area. We heard that staff talk about, the incentive to cluster, that if you just make it optional, we've heard this from some of the speakers too, that if it's just an optional, what's the incentive for a builder to actually cluster versus building 96,000 square foot homes? So I think you do have to find a mechanism, either whether it's an incentive, the carrot, or the stick with required, that you're going to have to figure that out. I think you're going to probably have to require clustering if you really want to get a certain percentage of open space. So maybe you have to keep an open space percentage that ensures you get the clustering that you're seeking. The other thing is the minimum requirements for lot circles and setbacks. I think you do need to keep those. I've heard some council members saying they didn't think they needed them. The reason why you need them is you don't want to end up with an ordinance like LDMR, where you have setbacks so small you can't get a ladder for fire protection. You have no driveways, so people are ended up parking in the fire lanes rather than having a driveway in front of the garage that they can park in when their garage gets full up. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment? I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't do audience conversations at council meetings. Mr. Berry, please take the podium. No, Mr. Berry. Each person only gets 3 minutes at a time at each hearing.
Can I allow her to do this?
No.
Okay. I'm very frustrated. This has held our lives in abeyance for over 19 years. And it is critical that we get closure on this. We have our son who's dying of the brain disorder. And the only path to helping him is the sale of our property. We're not great with investing money. We've used up almost all of our resources. I sent you links to the geologist reports. I hope you had a chance to look at them. They're simple and easy to read, short. It shows the infiltration quality of the lands in Zone 1. I fear that we're just going to get appealed again, and that's just going to stall it again. You know, we're living in a bubble, economic bubble right now. It's another real estate bubble. It's buoyed up by the Fed with interest rates low. It's going to end, they always do, and we'll go through another long cycle. This becomes something of a death sentence. We need to get this done, and it needs to work. And I should point out that developers have kind of vanished. This has been dragged out for so long that the interest that was great at one point is gone. You saw what Bob Bick conceived of a development up there with, 52 lots. And he set aside all of that, more than all of the wetland, to be untouched. So I think you can judge in your own minds what's right and what's wrong, what's real, and what's assumed. Thank you very much. Oh, I want to thank both members of council, current and past, who have helped us make it this far, and of course to the staff who works so darn hard on this. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any more comments from the public? Go ahead.
I heard threats tonight, and I heard bullying tonight. We have gone through this whole year of coming before you, and we have people in the audience who evidently don't have any problem spending money suing the city. I think it's time for those people to honor what you decide. We are honoring what you decide. And I think those people need to quit bullying us and ruining our lives. They don't even live around there. Somebody lives in Anacortes. Why are they deciding our lives? It's been another full year of failure, and I heard the threat that this will not stand, which means they're going to sue and appeal, and we are left with another year. Thanks.
Is there any more public comment? Go once. Okay. So we're into the council questions of staff. Is there any council member that'd like to go first? Deputy Mayor.
I have a very long list. Do you want me to just do questions or comments as well?
You could do both at the same time if you'd
Okay,
like.
my list, I didn't separate them, so. First of all, I agree about changing the name. I don't mind if you call it the shortened version, but I think on paper it needs to remain the same because I do agree that those words are important. Number 2, on page 2, the 20% impervious, is that 20% for the entire parcel of development, that 20% impervious?
Yes, it would be the subject property.
So it's not just the development or not just the buildable area?
Correct, yeah. It's basically, the 20% effective area would be based upon the gross site area.
So it's 20% of the,
Gross site area.
not the net buildable area, but the entire site?
Right, yes.
Okay. I'd be interested in that being closer to the net buildable.
Okay.
2, on page 7, impacts to groundwater interception if development includes excavations that penetrate shallow aquifer. So I'm not remembering, did we address that in the ordinance in terms of not allowing for disturbance of the aquifer and groundwater?
Yes, within the North Creek Fish and Wildlife Habitat, those language provisions are still in place.
Okay, great. Let's see. The retaining 35% building coverage. So we talked about this a little bit with the LID and PDES LID. I really think we need a separate clustering percentage. We kept the percentage higher for clustering, but I really think clustering should be a separate percentage, and I don't know what that should be. Page 10. So when we talk about what Ms. Eggard said in regards to the 33% of Zone 1, those wetlands are still a critical area and still protected, are they not?
Absolutely, as well as the buffer.
Okay. When we're talking about open space preservation, so again, the 15 to 30% that you're asking us to give you a number on, is that of the net buildable?
Of the net buildable, yes.
Okay, so my input would be 30%. Page 16, I'm in favor of a pure mathematical derivation of the buildable lot, or the lots. Page 16 again, I'm in favor of a 50% lot reduction, 50% circle. Page 25, I need you to explain to me what page 25 is telling me, because I didn't get the message.
And I'm sorry, what was that?
I think it's page 25. It's called GIS analysis, existing land areas per zoning classification. It's at 25 of the, it's 27 of the whole packet, but 25 of the Fitzgerald packet.
I don't have the same numbers that you have.
Oh.
Huh.
Do you have a figure number for him to go off of?
It's attachment 1, agenda bill, staff report, Bothell GIS analysis, table 2, existing land areas per zoning classification.
Oh, thank you.
No worries.
I'm sorry, it took me a while. Essentially what we had is that we had our GIS folks just have an idea of how much land area we have, both within the gross as well as within critical areas and critical area buffers. So essentially what they identified was that within the current 5400A LID, there's about 45% of those lands are subject to the critical area regulations. The 9600, as they are currently, is 51%. Our 40,000 is 40%. So that basically just gave you an idea of the relationship between the amount of critical areas and the area that is within those particular zones. Sorry.
Okay. So even if we do the mathematical determination of lots and the 50% reduction of lot size and circle, which I know I said last week I wasn't for, but I've been educated on what that means. We still, in terms of what James said, the real world scenario are we still going to be able to get, say it's 101, I can't remember, that number sticks in my head. Will we be able to get that 101 given those parameters and the 30%
Probably
open
not.
space? Okay.
Probably not.
So I would be interested in, once we make decisions tonight as a council in terms of percentage of open space that we decide to preserve in those whatever zoning, what the real numbers are. Can we do that?
Well, it's hard because usually what happens with the numbers is that it is affected by the site configuration and some of the characteristics of the site. And it's really difficult to predict how that's going to be. And in fact, in the real world number scenario we gave, oh, I'm sorry, there it is. When you have the range, and I'm going to use the 9600 because it's right at the top, and we have 3.3 to 4.2 is what we're seeing in the real world. The 4.2, they had a really great dimension, nice rectangular shaped property that had the right dimensions. The 3.3, the dimensions were a little bit less, the property went, so.
But
it's hard
that's not clustered, correct?
That is very correct, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. The best way to ensure that they get that potential is to allow the straight calculation that you have identified from the net buildable area. Whatever the net buildable area square footage is, you divide that by 9,600 and that gives you a number. That's the maximum number of lots. That's the best mechanism to get to the potential zoning density, if you would.
And I understand the side yard setbacks also plays into that. So I am a little concerned about houses 10 feet apart. Maybe we could figure out what it takes to put a ladder between them.
Well, actually, that is the standard. Right now, our current regulations have, you can have 5 foot on one side, and then the other side has to be greater, basically, so they both have to have 15. But you can have a 5 and a 5 against each other. And that's the standard that the fire department has identified to us that they want to see.
Oh, it is. Okay. Okay, moving on. I have more. Let's see, page 5. I'm going backwards. Let's see, maybe it's page 5 of the ordinance. Let's see. As it says, the objective of clustering is to preserve existing vegetation. As council knows, there's a direct relationship between the size of the lot and the amount of open space preserved. So I guess you may have already answered that. So what we're saying is the maximum lot yield is not insured because of those other issues like open space preservation.
Well, and actually this is where the concepts, the illustrations kind of help a little bit because in this situation, we stayed at a fairly small, 4,800 to 5,000 square foot. And that gets you a pretty good sized amount of open space preservation within the net. If these lots were 4, 5, or 6 or 7,000 square feet, this number would be smaller. The open space provided would be smaller. As the lots grow bigger, it takes up more of that net buildable area.
Okay. Page 7, open space. So what I'm wondering is, should the percentage of the net buildable area that's dedicated to open space, should that be based on the actual specific site? Because when we look at that, I mean, I don't know if Zone 1 is going to be developed as one piece, but obviously some of those lots are really, really impeded by wetlands. And so there's almost zero area to develop. And so I'm just wondering, is it naive to put one provision over the entire Zone 1?
Yeah, I think what I hear you're saying is that there's maybe a sliding scale that you could apply, and you'd have to come up with some really specific criteria. And I'm not sure exactly what criteria we would apply, because it'd be almost a value judgment. Okay, well, this particular lot is severely impacted by critical areas, and it gets a number of, I'm not sure, I'm just throwing something out there. No, it gets to preserve 25% of its net buildable area. If you have a area that's not got any critical areas, it has a 30%. It'd be hard to get that type of a value function into a really straightforward, easily to administer code.
Okay. Another question, page 14. How do we know or ensure that forest cover is protected in the future? If we're preserving 60%, how do we know that it's protected in the future and that homeowners can't just go in and, you know, like West Seattle, just decide to?
Well, two things. One is that it would be placed into a permanent dedicated tract of some type, and whether that's owned by the homeowners association or some other entity, that tract would be basically in perpetuity run with the land. Very similar to what tracts we have in some of our other developments in the city, where we have large areas of open space preserved. It's placed into a separate tract underneath the ownership of the owners association. That's the usual methodology we go for. Now, those are fairly successful because the monitoring system is the property owners. You'll have one property owner in that development call up and say, hey, I hear chainsaws in our greens belt area, get down here right away. And that's our best mechanism, because our single code enforcement officer can't be listening at the car window for the sound of chainsaw. So that's really a successful mechanism to preserve those open space areas.
So when we talk about a 60% forested condition, that's over the entire Zone 1? It's not by?
No, that's not Zone 1.
Oh.
Zone 1 would not have the 60%. That would be within the Nickfoot-Chapa area, which would exclude
okay.
Zone 1.
So then how are we ensuring preservation in Zone 1?
That's where the clustering comes in.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So that's part of that mechanism. All right. Page 16. So it talks about the modification of development regulations. To accommodate low-impact development, the community development director is authorized to modify chapters, blah, blah, blah. Are there guidelines in place for the community development director to make decisions?
Yes, in fact, that's actually part of the existing 1988 ordinance. And essentially what it does is it does identify a couple things. And the reduction has to be in conjunction with implementation of low-impact development. You have to use low-impact development, and it has to be consistent with our comprehensive plan and some of those provisions. So the idea behind that language was you couldn't just say, well, I'm going to have a lot of 50% smaller just because I want to. It had to be in function of your low-impact development strategy.
And then in terms of the setbacks with property lines with, say, outside of the development, what are the setbacks?
Well, I'm sorry. One of the things about the planned unit development is that it requires a mandatory front yard setback to be applied to the entire outside perimeter of the property. So the idea behind that is that if we did decide to use the PUD mechanism as a reduction process, they'd have to provide for that 20-foot setback. As well as there's some language in the existing 1988 ordinance that actually identifies there's a 25-foot setback whenever you reduce the lot areas. So we're going to have to come up with some marriage between the two of those.
Okay. I'm almost to the end. I'm in favor of actually making clustering mandatory in this situation. I'm not I don't think I'm in favor of transfer of impervious area. To me, that doesn't make sense since we've separated Zone 1 anyway. I am in favor of using the PUD mechanism, and I'm in favor of the staff recommendation of 9,600 if we're using the mathematical determination of lot yield. So hopefully that's all the questions you had. If not, I'm sure we'll have another round. But I do want to thank you. This was probably the most useful staff report that that I've gotten on Fitzgerald, and
Thanks, I think.
no, well, just in time. No, you know, the visuals really help. As someone who doesn't have a ton of experience in this, it really helps to I'm a visual person, and so it was very helpful to see how these scenarios play out. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, who would like to go next? Anybody? Somebody's got to go. No, you have no comment? Councilmember Agnew.
Well, thank you for your presentation. I think what we're supposed to do is recommend some direction on this. Direct staff to prepare an ordinance amending the comp plan and code to rezone Zone 1 east of 39th from R 5400 to 9600. You know, I stated earlier that I'd like to see it R 5400. I don't think I'm going to change that. I like the idea of the clustering mechanism. I think we need to move forward with that. I think that will help the city in the long run with retention of trees in our ecosystem. And I think those are the two things you wanted me to comment on, if I'm not mistaken.
Perhaps if clustering was mandatory or optional?
Mandatory.
Okay, thank you.
But I'd also like to say that I may be out of line, and the mayor probably is going to say something to me, but it seems earlier tonight we were threatened, and I don't appreciate that. What the Growth Management Board is going to do, we don't know what they're going to do. So to say that they're going to do this if we do this, I just didn't appreciate it. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Who'd like to go next? Councilmember Spivey.
Great, thank you. So Bruce, just if you could go to what you have up here now, well, what you have there now, and this is what, the 9,600 with 15 lots,
yes,
buildable lots. Now, if you go to the clustering version, we get 17 lots. So my thought on clustering was always to take what you could get under, you know, your original zoning, and then no more than that, so that you're getting more green space as well as reducing the infrastructure costs for the developer, because they don't have to go as deep into the property. So is there a reason why you chose to go add the 2 lots versus doing the same lot yield?
Well, basically what that is, and we have a same lot yield provision, and these are our current planned unit development mechanisms. And essentially what that does is that requires the developer to prepare a mock plat that you lay out, kind of like what this would do. Whoops, I'm sorry. What we were looking for was trying to come up with a simpler way to determine the maximum number of lots, because this is a really complex, expensive, difficult process to go through. If we can just do a simple calculation that gives us the guaranteed maximum number of lots, it makes everybody's life so much easier.
Okay.
And this kind of comes along with, you know, the clarity and the easier to administer and the kind of stuff. We just thought this would be a really good way to do that.
Okay. I'm understanding your logic. I'm trying to find balance. So, so thank you on that. On what you're looking for from council, I am all in favor of removing Zone 1 from the Nick Fuchapwa, and then I am with Councilmember Agnew on the R5400. I believe this is an opportunity for us to work with Arch and developers to create a larger inventory of affordable housing. As was also mentioned earlier by one of our speakers, we need to take these unique opportunities where we can, and I think this is one of those chances to do that. And having that R5400A, I would even be, you know, okay with a detached, but the idea that we can create some affordable housing, I'm all in favor of. As far as, I'm fine with mandatory clustering in there. I would like to, because of the simplicity of the mechanism that you have here, I'm just, I'd be curious to know if you took on the slide before, if you, how many more lots, or does it end up being the same if you factored in the buffers, as some of the people have requested in the 9600 model that you have there? Does it essentially boil down to 17 lots, as in the clustering version?
You know, one of the things about our regulation is that's that 80-foot circle, and that's kind of a space occupier, if you would. And that's basically what's happening here, is that it's this dimension here that is getting us to this number of 15. Now, would it be possible to get another lot? Probably. I think maybe you do some gerrymandering of boundaries and do something like that. But including the critical area buffer in the lot area is contrary to a lot of existing regulations in the city of Bothell, as well as our comprehensive plan.
I get that, but if you were going essentially requiring clustering, and we're using the overall lot size to see what your determination is, if you did this calculation using the buffers, does it come out to 17 lots?
It comes out more than 17.
Okay.
Yes.
So, okay. And that's what, one of the questions I had. So, okay. I'm in support of an R5400, be it A or D, required clustering, and removing zone 1 out of there. Thank you.
Councilmember McNeil.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Bruce.
You're welcome.
I agree with Councilmember Spivey. Finding the right balance is going to be critical here. Very tough decision to make, and my heart goes out to everybody who's involved in this process. It's not fun sitting here or out there, I know, but we got to make a decision. We got to figure out what's best for not only everybody in this room, but the community as well. So I guess I had a couple questions, Bruce, on the clustering mechanism. So if you look at this, the 9600 to the 7200 to a 5400, the 5400 I don't believe you have tonight, is that correct?
I didn't put it in here, no, because so far we hadn't talked about it a lot, but it is there.
So if we look at the 96 to 72, if we added that additional area 54, what would that look like for preservation of open space with clustering mechanism?
Generally, what I think we are finding is that the more lots you put onto this space, you had a little bit less open space potential. And that was just basically from the pure provision of accommodating a certain minimum lot size and a minimum lot circle. I don't think any of the scenarios I prepared had a lot size less than 3,500, or I think one had 3,000 square feet. But even at that, that's a really small lot. You're still having a little bit less open space. The 9600 is a really classic example of what you could do with the clustering.
So if we did go to 5400, then I'm looking at kind of the difference between 9600 and 72, and it looks like the lower you go with your zoning, the less open space you're preserving.
I think in general that's correct, unless, and I'm going to throw this, I'm sorry, I hate to do this to you, you go to the 5400A attached, and then you do townhomes. That's a really different animal that basically really gets into some serious clustering. That was the original concept behind the LID overlay. But at a 5400D, I think your assertion is correct that there is a little bit less open space than at the higher lot area zones.
So is that why you guys are proposing the 9600?
That's part of it.
Because
yes.
You're getting more open space?
A little bit, yes. It's also a very easy zone. And at the September 20th meeting, we did hear quite a bit of support for 9600. There was, of course, a split, but we heard a lot of 9600 support too.
Okay. And then the total acreage for the area that's east of 39th that we're talking about, do you have the acreage of that?
Yes, that area, the net area, when you deduct the curricular areas and the curricular bus, is about 22 acres
Okay, so that would be every single property
within Zone 1.
Zone 1.
Yes.
And if I'm looking at actually the map that shows the 5400A LID. Yes, right here. So it looks like there's 4 lots along the top there, okay?
Yes.
And then there's, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I guess my question would be, are all of those lots going to be for sale in this model that we're looking at right now?
I don't know how I could predict what their sales possibilities are.
So if you could go back to your 9600,
You bet.
Donnie, the map, yeah. So I guess my question would be, if we're using this as the model and we're looking at multiple property owners, if they don't all sell, then how do we do this model?
Oh, I see what you're saying. And there's no doubt about the fact that if you gather a larger number of, basically accumulate a larger number of areas, the development potentials is much greater, yes.
Much greater, yeah.
That really is true.
Okay.
Whether you cluster or not.
Okay. And then, so I'm definitely for the mandatory clustering. I'm actually torn right now on the zoning, the 96, 72, 54. But I think just in watching and listening and hearing and looking at your presentation, it seems to me like if our goal is to kind of balance things out and have some preservation as well as allowing building, and maybe we want to balance a little more to preservation, we might stay at the higher 9600. But then that also makes me think, okay, if we were to go lower and still maintain the preservation and create an affordable housing element, which would be, to me, would be a mandatory affordable housing element. So if they want to get more yield, by getting more yield, they got to create affordable housing. That might be something to look at as well. So I don't know how we can create that element with clustering and affordability, but hearing from Arch last week and talking about affordability, how could we, because I know that the ultimate goal is to get yield so that there's a value there, but at the same time there's preservation. And I think that you can preserve and get your yield at the same time if you balance it properly. Now, that's just my perspective, but we hear a lot about this in conversations throughout some of these committees on how you do that. So
yes. The interesting thing about the affordable housing component, and this is something that I'd have to think a little bit more, I'd like to consult with Arthur Sullivan of Arch, is that most of our affordable housing that's applied mandatorily is based upon a rezone that increases the zoning potential. This area is already 5400A. In this case, we're actually down zoning, if you would. It's going to be less zoning. So I think what you're saying is that you would base upon a potential bonus if you were to provide affordable units. It's kind of what I may be hearing you. If they do all the other things, clustering and preservation of open space and things like that. If they wanted to have a few more additional units, they'd do an affordable housing component.
it's possible, yeah.
Okay.
How does that, I don't know how that looks, so.
I don't
That's
either.
more of a question on asking an opinion on 96, 72, or 54. I'm leaning more towards the 9600 because of the preservation, but at the same time, if there's an opportunity to create affordable housing, then we should be looking at that, allowing that element as well. Now, I guess the last thing I would say is there an opportunity on part of this for a transfer of development rights?
Probably yes, but a TDR program, we took a shot at creating one in part of the 2015 plan and code update. It was a really complex process, and we'd have to be really focused as to where we would identify that would occur. forest and impervious surface transfer is not too hard as far as, in relative terms, but density transfers are tough.
But an element of
It
portion, because
it certainly could become, yes.
because until this becomes one big lot, it's individual properties, correct?
That's right.
Okay. All right, that's all I had. Thanks, Bruce.
Councilmember Freed.
Great. Bruce, nice to see you. I'm just trying to look at my John L. Scott real estate app here to see how many houses are in the $375,000 price range, because I don't know if I laughed out loud at the impossibility when Arthur spoke last week, but he talked about a $95,000 income per household is able to buy a $350,000 home, and I'm thinking, where in Bothell does that exist? It's a very difficult challenge to come up with, and what I'm finding is obviously it's a lot of probably older housing. I probably see 40 here on my map total, which obviously if with the number of houses we have here, that's a very small percentage, and it'd be interesting to come up with a number. But it is curious as I hear people's conversation tonight and the ideas that they're having in regards to affordable housing, because we all realize that it's a very important thing that we need to focus on. And in Bothell, affordable housing may be something far greater than $350,000. It could be $650,000 is an affordable house. That seems very odd to say, but it's amazing where we've gone with our real estate environment here in recent years, where we're seeing houses in Bothell be even up to $1.3 million in price range for a 4,000 square foot house. It's pretty incredible. Even more than that if you're in Valhalla, but I don't want to mention that thing. But a couple friends here on council that might be living in that neighborhood. We're seeing very positive real estate values for our citizens in Bothell, and obviously a lot of people want to move here, just as we live here, because it's a great place to live, because we honor neighborhoods, we honor the environment, and a lot of things that we do here as a council and as a community. Affordable housing is a big issue to allow people to be able to live close enough to their places of work. We heard tonight from the Puget Sound Regional Council how many people are traveling from far regions. Did you guys see on there Kitsap County? 400 people coming from Bothell from Kitsap County? Oh my goodness, it's incredible. So we definitely have a need. And you look at different areas of real estate, different segments of real estate, and we are entirely lacking when it comes to townhome availability. For people to be able to purchase, entry into the market, to be able to have townhomes to be able to purchase. I don't see a lot of that happening in the city of Bothell right now. A lot of people are renting with their incomes at that $95,000 level. And if we could offer an opportunity for them to buy in the $550,000 to $600,000 price range, or even probably less if it's a townhome here on this property, we could maybe do an amazing thing as honor the environment at the same time that we honor a great need that we have with affordable housing. And we won't even put even a miniature little dent in it if we even go to our 5400A, but we will make a huge impact in those 140 or 150 families that are living there that will very much feel an impact to be able to live even near their place of work, rather than maybe that similar type of product that they'd be buying or price range should be up in Marysville or somewhere else. So I think, Bruce, the questions you have before us tonight are the zoning, what we're leaning for. I heard a few people say 5400. I'd certainly be in favor of 5400 A. I think it allows for an opportunity to think that we're missing right now, which would be attached townhomes. I think that we need to encourage clustering. So I am saying that we need to, in this area, protect the environment, and I think we're hearing support from council as that as well. We already talked about removing Zone A. I think maybe the name is the last one. I like NICPA. I'm fine with NICPA. It's easy. We've heard the NICACHAPA for a very long time, and I think everybody understands that we want to work on protecting the area. That is not unclear to us, and it is quite an interesting name and confusing, but I think all of us understand our motivations in the conversations for 12 years, maybe 15 years on this property. So Bruce, is that what specifically you were looking for?
That helps. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, sir.
Okay. So I have a quick question. So BMC 1214-030B3, the net buildable area calculation, How many cities make detached houses do a different method
Not very.
than that? So most of them just do that right out of the gate. Doesn't matter if it's attached or detached. Okay.
That's the more normal standard.
And then they still have lot circles and minimum lot sizes.
Yes,
Even-
although I just a note, most of them have a smaller number. Most of them have an R4 designation, which is 4 units per acre. And then they'll say, okay, within that R4, you have a certain minimal lot size or lot circle you have to apply. And it's usually fairly low, like 4,000 or 5,000 square feet or something like that.
Okay. Because I think what you showed, it was only going to be 4 houses anyways at 9,600. It was 1.86, but we don't allow people to round up.
I'm sorry, the,
I don't know, it was one of the examples that you gave.
oh, that may have been the R40,000 designation.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yes, I'm
All
sorry.
right.
Yeah, there we go.
So I'm in support of that, just to make it a little more clear for people when they buy property in the city to what exactly they should anticipate for a lot yield. Having to do this layout and everything else, it seems cumbersome, at least from the perspective of what happens in other cities in this area. Seems like maybe we're dragging something around that we don't necessarily benefit from keeping in place. So that's that one. Definitely, we need a legislative version or a track change version of this document, because I read it and sat down my 310 pages last night. Thank you for that. And I thought the same thing. Like, what, I can't comprehend
Yeah,
what's
and we
changed.
can certainly provide that.
Okay.
You betcha.
I like the name. You know, we've used different handles here, but I think everybody knows, for better or for worse, what this area, what the overlay means. And so I think all the wording in it was, like I think somebody said, it was carefully crafted, and I don't see a point in really changing it at this point. If we were starting anew, maybe we would think it through to have a 7-letter acronym for a name, but I think we passed that gate some time ago. So forest equivalent low impact development facilities, can you explain what exactly that is?
Yeah, and I'll do the best I can because I'm not the geology or the
Stormwater.
engineer or stormwater. But basically what it is a forest equivalent is you capture your rainwater that comes from the sky and you put it into a specific type of facility. And it's a bio-retention facility or a rain garden or something that puts the emphasis is putting the water back into the groundwater that you capture from your surface water.
Okay, so like,
That's basically what it is.
so could we, I just have some concern about that, because that's not what it's called in the stormwater design manual for the city of Bothell. So it'd probably be an infiltration facility or some other term that you could use, that there's
Infiltration facility
connectivity.
doesn't sound very nice.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like forest,
I
but
know.
the thing about forest equivalent too, it's kind of, it's been a handle or a term that's been used. It's not,
It is a little
you
bit,
can't
yes.
replace forest with anything we construct as human beings. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
You're right.
So
The best thing to do is to disperse it into forest. Let me work on the name and I'll come back with something that's not going to be near as much fun, but it might be more accurate.
maybe knock on Public Works door and see if they can help you. I'm sure they'd be
They
happy
don't
to.
like forest equivalent either. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Figured. So I think we went over this, but I just wanted to make sure. So we've been talking about having a clustering mechanism for the properties east of 39th, but then we're taking it out of the LID overlay area. So what's the overlay area for the clustering?
Within the, clustering within the LID that would be west of 39th Avenue, is that kind of what you're looking for?
No, I mean east. So we're
East, okay. Yeah, and that's basically where the clustering would come in, and that's where we've kind of talked about, okay, how much open space would be mandatory here, what methodology we would use. That's where the clustering would come into play really clearly without the LID overlay. The LID overlay does have some clustering discussion in it. It's about reducing the lot size a certain amount, but only in support of low impact development techniques. In zone 1, it would be more along the support of preserving forest areas or open space.
okay. So is our new clustering area literally 40 acres then, when we're said and done with this change, or is it going to be?
Well,
because before you answer that, I'm worried because this is what we did last time, and people have not been able to sell their property east of 39th, and that's why we're here. And we've spent a lot of resources and time trying to figure out a happy middle ground here. And I just worry if we have 40 acres of the city of Bothell with some overlay for requiring clustering, I think we basically accomplished nothing.
Yes, it is a bit of a conundrum. Now, in a few months, if you look at our work program, we actually will be bringing to the council a citywide clustering provision.
Okay, so this is not that.
No, this is not that. This is
Okay.
only applied to the Fitzgerald area for now. Now, what you could do once you do get that citywide clustering, if it works for Fitzgerald, maybe we could take the stuff out of Fitzgerald and then the 9600 would just be whatever the citywide clustering would be. But that's something that I don't want to get too far down that road because I'm not sure what that's going to look like.
All right, so I guess I would just caution, I'd have some concern about just the 40 acres having some clustering requirement out of the entire 14 square miles of city. That just seems kind of odd. It's kind of the same accord. I mean, I agree with every council member up here about affordable housing, and then transfer of development rights is also an interesting tool. But what I've also heard from the property owners east of 39th is they're out of time. And, you know, we can keep coming up with great ideas and it just burns more time. So I'd like to see this be resolved by the end of the year. I think that was the intent of sending this information to Commerce when we did.
It was actually, that's exactly.
And so let's get this done by the end of the year. If we can try to figure out some affordable housing thing and the one more public hearing that we have, great. Otherwise, I would hesitate to continue to drag this on any further than we have. So with that, let's see. So the questions that you asked, so looking at 9600, or the zoning, I'm sorry, east of 39th and making it 9600, what we're really trying to do at the end of the day is try to make that 4,800 square foot lots with clustering. Because if you allow a 50% reduction in the lot, so that's even below 5,400. And really what we're trying to do is with the lot yield, we don't want it to be 5,400A divided by the gross net buildable area. That's all I think as a council, at least the majority of council, I think that's where we're at, is we're just trying to find a balance in there because we have two different sides to this story. We're just trying to find a happy medium, or unhappy medium probably is more like it, and try to move, everybody can move on with their lives. So I do support the 9600. I think it's important that we can do the lot reduction and the clustering. I'm not comfortable with it trying to ram it in through this part of it. I think we should wait till we have the clustering ordinance because I don't think it'll be wildly different than that for the whole city. Maybe it will be, but I would be surprised if there's a whole lot of different varieties to clustering. The technical white paper that was brought up, do we know where that's at in process?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was one of those things that had to go by the wayside. We were going to, basically, the staff report you have before you tonight on the clustering, we're going to trying to send that out a little bit earlier. It just ran out of time.
Okay.
Just so much stuff going on right now.
Understood. So, and I think you touched on this with Councilmember McNeil, but so why did staff go to a 9,600 square foot recommendation for the zoning in east of 39th?
Well, primarily because we heard some pretty strong support from the council previously about that type of designation, and it works really well for a clustering provision, if that's kind of what we're really trying to do here. 7,200, I mean, it's not quite as good, but it still works really well as well. And that was our initial thought, was 7,200. But, you know, we think that 9,600 is the easiest, right? The easiest mechanism to go, just from the standpoint of the area and the perception, as well as the need to have not a tremendous amount of development out there.
I think the better statement, or probably the more descriptive statement, is to have a clustering provision that we're working on now through a PUD dovetail with the baseline zoning for both areas. And since we will be providing it for areas that are west, that are already zone 9600, we thought, well, that'll also work for areas of east of 39th. And then, and so we thought maybe that's a better zoning district to apply. If the majority of council wants to keep the 5400A, I think that's a different clustering ordinance in my book. I don't think it'll really look like what we've worked up today. We'll have to work up a new one.
Oh, so your clustering ordinance is not just the 40 acres, it'd be the entire sub-area.
Well, sorry, I'll let Bruce answer.
Ideally, we'd have one mechanism that we'd apply across the area, but our focus tonight was on the 39 acres, 40 acre area.
Okay.
Yeah. So if there's a way we could get those, if there's a way we could get those combined, that'd be cool. I mean, it'd be great. It'd make it so much easier for us all and our administration of this regulation.
So I'd be interested in that, but I'm not comfy with those 40 acres having some special spot requirement for clustering. Okay. Let's see. Do I like the name? I think that's about it. And then you wanted more direction, direct staff to prepare an ordinance. Okay, so yeah, I'm in favor of the lot clustering as long as it's not the 40 acres. 9,600, I think, is probably the appropriate zoning for this area. Percentage of,
Mandatory clustering or optional?
you know, I would rather it be not mandatory. I would probably start off there, you know, and if people don't utilize that tool, then we made a bad tool. We need to fix it. And I think trying to force it just leaves this area in the same perpetual situation that it's been in. If it's not a good tool, nobody will use it. And if it is, I think they will. I think the value of those houses would be worth quite a bit if you had that. That's what I'm hearing people are desiring in new development. So I think a big house is more valuable if they built that way. But I mean, that's just me. I think I'm done, right? Is there anything else you need to know from me? Okay, good. Thank you, Bruce. This has been a hard road to plow. Do we want to do another round?
Well, during the discussion, I was wondering if staff could show what a 5400A clustering would look like.
Sure. I mean, is everybody okay with that? Well, I know you are. Yeah.
You said it looks like different animals, so.
And the reason I say it is because the attached, you're talking townhomes, not, and actually, I'll go through, I've got a pile of stuff like this, but I can go through and see if I've got one ready to made and I can get that packaged up to you guys.
Yeah, it just where you show the comparisons, what that looks like you did before. Just so we're comparing equally. Thank you.
Councilmember Freed?
Would we have a D also that you might have?
Yes, I do have it.
I mean, if you have it.
I do.
Oh, you got all this stuff already created, huh?
I did, yes.
Oh. And if I can make one clarification on one of my misstatements earlier.
Yeah, you have the floor.
So I said there were 40 homes available in the $325,000 to $375,000 range. 100% wrong. If John L. Scott is correct, there's only 5, 3 of which are townhomes. So, and sometimes affordable housing is not a requirement, it's a result. It happens by a natural process, I guess. So if you're building townhomes, obviously you're not going to pay for $650,000. People are willing to pay $350,000. So. Thank you.
Does anybody else would like to have a second round? No? Okay. So, do we need to make a motion to continue the public hearing? Okay, good. Could I have a motion to continue the public hearing?
So moved.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilmember McNeil to continue the public hearing until November 8th, 2016. We're going to try the voting buttons again. Okay, place your vote. Passes 6 to passes unanimously with Councilmember Sandberg absent and excused. We need a break, so we're going to take a 10-minute break and be back at 9.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, we might need a motion to extend the meeting as well.
Oh, yeah, it's 9. Okay.
Wow. Motion to extend till 9:45. 10.
10 or 9:45?
10.
Okay. Motion's made by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilmember McNeil to extend the meeting until 10 p.m. All those in, well, we're going to try to vote. passes 3-2 with Councilmember Spivey and Freed in the negative, and Councilmember Sandberg absent excused. We're at recess till 9:10.